Chapter 26, Invasion, Part 1. Most of the crowd sat in stunned silence as they stared at the giant black tower that had appeared in front of them. Just moments ago they had been cheering like crazy for what had been the most heated battle of the tournament yet. Now, they simply didn't know what to think. Guy, however, was not one to sit idle. Lee, Hinata, Naruto. He was off towards the tower faster than lightning. Guy, wait! Kakashi screamed, but his rival was already gone. Guy appeared in front of the giant barrier, his fist pulled back, ready to deliver a powerful punch. No you don't. Zabuza shouted as he appeared behind the Jonin and latched himself onto him. Let me go. Guy shook him off. My students are in there. Just then several explosions bounced off the arena as the Anbu appeared. A couple of them smashed into the barrier and they suddenly caught fire and tumbled towards the crowd. All the other Jonin who had just been on the move paused as well. You see, Zabuza shouted. This isn't an ordinary barrier. Zabuza's right. Kakashi landed next to them. It's dangerous. Let's get up to Hokage-sama. He'll know what to do. Guy nodded. All three Jonin vanished an instant later. Meanwhile the crowd finally seemed to realize what was going on. Panic was quickly spreading and they were trying to flee the stadium. What the heck is going on? Tamari asked as she watched people fleeing by her. I'm not sure. Haku shook his head and turned to the others that were with them. We need to get you guys out of here though. The village may be under attack. Attack? Tazuna shouted in horror. Can we even get out of here without being trampled? Ayame asked skeptically. Haku smiled. Or Shinobi, we'll get you out. While all this had gone on, the Kabuto who stood next to the Hokage gave a small victorious smile. Looks like you didn't catch me in time. He had no time to move as his limbs were bound by a wood technique. You bastard, Yamato seethed as he stared with complete loathing at the man. He wanted to crush the life out of him right on the spot. What did you do? The Hokage asked gravely as he walked up behind the bound man. I created a barrier that also acted as a signal. Kabuto answered as if he had been expecting the question. Sarutobi turned his gaze to the black tower. It went impossibly high into the air so it was definitely visible for miles. That meant an enemy army was likely already at their gates. He had to think fast. Not even a moment later and all kinds of Jonin and Chunin began to appear around him. They were crowded incredibly close together on the tight space of the roof of the stadium. Hayate appeared bowed in front of him. I apologize, Hokage-sama. His cough wasn't present at all. I let the enemy catch me off guard. Sarutobi nodded down at him. He didn't have much time to waste with words so instead he turned his attention to Kabuto. What are your intentions? Kabuto gave a restricted shrug. Just think of this as an experiment to provide me with some amusement. You won't escape with your life. Guy shouted as he took a step forward. The second we bring that barrier down your life is forfeit. Kabuto chuckled. You better hurry then. If you open it too late I'll be the least of your worries. Everyone's eyes widened and they turned back to the barrier. Naruto was in there, which meant only one thing. You bastard, Guy had to restrain every muscle in his body to keep from destroying the man in front of him. That's enough, Guy. The Hokage shouted. I need all the Jonin and Chunin to report to the front gate immediately to back them up for an invasion. The Hokage turned to a Chunin who was kneeling on the roof. Get the best shinobi from our barrier branch here now. I want them to begin breaking that thing down immediately. All Jonin sensei gather your genin and have them begin to evacuate the civilians. Their safety is a top priority. Sir. Everyone shouted as they all fled about to perform their assigned tasks. The only Konoha shinobi left around the Hokage were Hiyashi, Kakashi, Yamato, Guy, Hayate and Zabuza. Just then a Chunin who had been stationed at the gate landed in front of Hokage. Hokage-sama. We're under attack, he shouted. How many of them are there? He asked immediately. How long can you keep them from breaching the gates? Sir, the man hesitated. Speak. Sarutobi didn't have time for this. There were at least a couple thousand of them, but they were coming from the sky. Many of them have already flown into the village. The Hokage's eyes widened. They set fires everywhere as they traveled. There were more approaching from the forest floor, but I didn't stay long enough to get even a rough number. Sora Shinobi technology. Everyone present turned back to Kabuto. The white-haired man broke out into laughter. Nothing like that, even I'm not capable of locating that old village. Hokage-sama. Hiashi shouted suddenly, his Byakugan was on. How are they doing it, Hiashi? The Hokage turned to the head of the Hyuga. Not they, he. Hiashi blinked a couple times as if to make sure he was seeing things right. What is it? The Hokage's patience was wearing thin. There are thousands of them all right, but they're all the same person. Hiashi's voice came out dry. Who? Sarutobi shouted. The contestant, Abumi Zaku. Just as he uttered those words, a couple dozen of said boy came flying overhead. They were propelling themselves forward with the fire that sprayed from their hands. I'm back, bitches. All of them yelled as their stomachs opened and kunai began firing. Hokage-sama, take cover. Kakashi and Guy shouted as they moved to attack the small fleet overhead. Sarutobi didn't move an inch from the spot though. Instead he formed a set of seals. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. He breathed out a fireball so massive that it easily was big enough to hit every Zaku overhead, and hit them it did. They were all obliterated to the point that not even ashes remained. Not Hokage for nothing, huh? Kabuto chuckled. I wonder though how you'll all fare against a group of opponents just as strong as yourself. Silence him. Sarutobi didn't even turn back to Kabuto. Yamato didn't need to be told twice. He clenched his hand and the wood tightened around Kabuto until he poofed into smoke. My orders from before stand the same. The Hokage shouted. The civilians are #1 priority. I want the all Anbu operatives to engage the Otogakure shinobi known as Zaku that have infiltrated the village. Remember to watch out for his self-destructing ability. The Anbu nodded and were also off. Sir. Kakashi's voice was heavy with dread. He was up on the roof staring off towards the gates. Sarutobi jumped up next to him immediately. The sight that befell his eyes made his face go pale. Many places of the village had already been set ablaze as thousands of the tiny figures that could only be Zaku flew around. Many shinobi were already engaging the robotic shinobi as others hurried towards the gates. For it was at the gates that an even more disturbing sight lay. All around, the gates of Konoha had already fallen. Hundreds of shinobi garbed in black poured into the village. The most horrendous thing though, was the way in which the gates had been destroyed. One wall had been completely overrun by giant roots of wood. Another looked like it had been blasted away by a tidal wave. Yet another had been set completely ablaze. The final wall had been battered down by a group of giant snakes. This can only mean one thing. Sarutobi rubbed his temple as he stared at the wreckage. Hiashi, what is your clan doing? Most of them have joined the battle with your orders. Hiashi answered without missing a beat. Excellent, I want you to stay by the barrier so you can protect the barrier squad once they arrive. I am leaving the execution of the traitor, Yakushi Kabuto, to you at the time the barrier is down. Yes, sir. Hiashi was off before anything else could be said. Zabuza. I'm already on it, Hokage-sama. Zabuza took off before anyone else could really be sure of what he had just been assigned. Kakashi, I need you to lead the engagement against the enemy at the second gate. Take command there. Kakashi looked at the Hokage in surprise before he nodded slowly. Yes, sir. Guy. Sarutobi shouted. The third gate, sir. Guy had a terrible feeling in the pit of his stomach. Yamato. Sir, you can't expect me to. Yamato stared in horror at the giant roots that had destroyed the first gate. Hayate. I need you to go with him. I won't fail again, sir. Hayate nodded to Yamato, who also said nothing more. Sarutobi turned his head to the giant snakes while he bit down on his thumb hard enough to draw blood. Kuchio's no jutsu. A giant monkey suddenly appeared next to him. A series of protests from the remaining group of shinobi broke out. Hokage-sama. You cannot enter the front lines. Silence. Sarutobi roared. It is time I take responsibility for my mistake. I thought I could pass it off to the next generation, but that was wrong. Monkey King Enma. Sarutobi extended his hand. The monkey that stood next to him smirked. Been a long time since I've seen you this serious, Sarutobi. The monkey transformed into a staff that Sarutobi swung around a couple of times. It's about time. For our village, Sarutobi shouted as he threw his Hokage garments aside, revealing shinobi armor on underneath. He and the remaining shinobi took off towards their respective gates. What is this? Lee shouted as he slowly turned himself around, gazing at the black barrier that had them trapped. Just a little something that I had set up so we could have a good time without being interrupted. Kabuto chuckled as he pushed his glasses up and walked over to Naruto. I give you both my thanks. Things would have been much more difficult if you hadn't beaten the Jinchuriki host down so much. Kabuto nudged Naruto in the ribs with his foot. Don't touch him, Hinata shouted. She charged at Kabuto without hesitation. Before she even got close, Neji appeared in her path. Hinata stopped hard. Ni-san, move, Hinata said carefully. I'm sorry, Hinata-sama, I'm not in control of my body. Neji stepped forward and sent a jukin into Hinata's stomach, blasting her off her feet. She landed with a loud splash a couple feet away. Hinata. Lee ran up to her and lifted her up slightly. He then glared at Kabuto. What did you do to Neji? Just then he noticed strange black markings appear all over Neji's body. I placed a special seal on him, Kabuto said as he bent down and grabbed Naruto by the hair. The blonde grit his teeth in pain as the white-haired man hoisted him up. His body is mine to control with my mind. If you want to stop him, you'll have to immobilize him. Or kill you, Hinata muttered darkly as she stumbled to her feet. Kabuto broke into laughter. If you can. He reached into his back pouch and pulled out a small wooden cross. Tell me, Naruto-kun, do you know what this is? Go to hell. Naruto seethed darkly. Kabuto's wicked smile grew a little bigger. He bent down and planted the small cross in the ground beneath the water. He then formed a single one-handed seal. The small cross sprouted smoke, and when the smoke cleared, the cross was the size of himself. This is the tool that embodies human sacrifice. This is where the Kyuubi will be extracted from. Everyone widened their eyes. Before Lee or Hinata could react, Kabuto slammed the back of Naruto's head against the cross. He grabbed one of his hands, pinned it up with a kunai right through Naruto's palm. He then grabbed the other hand and pinned it to the other side. Naruto howled in pain each time. Naruto-kun, Naruto. Lee and Hinata ran forward, but Neji again stood in the way. Hinata, you go for him. I'll take care of Neji. Lee shouted as he lunged forward, tackling Neji to the ground. Hinata ran past them and straight at Kabuto. Oh. Kabuto had to resist the urge to chuckle as Hinata ran up to him. She reached him and swung her jukin, but Kabuto knocked the strike aside. Before she could react, he buried his foot in her ribs. Hinata was sent rolling to the side. Lee raised his arm and was about to swing his fist down, but he felt a sudden burning sensation in his stomach. He was then sent flying upwards. He crashed down in the shallow water with a loud splash. Kabuto slowly took a few steps forward. I'll be with you in a minute, Naruto-kun. I want to have a little fun before I have to get serious. Lay another hand on my friends and I'll bite them off. Naruto looked up and his eyes were glowing red. A second later though, and he felt something strange. Something was siphoning his power. His red eyes returned back to blue. Hinata gasped as she stumbled back up. Naruto-kun, don't channel the fox's chakra. That thing is stealing it. She then began to charge back towards him, fully intent on freeing him. Please try to refrain from interfering further. You wouldn't even be here if you hadn't run to check on your teammates. What an annoying girl. Kabuto sighed at her. He ran through a couple seals. Whips of water shot up and bound Hinata. She stumbled forward and her face disappeared below the water. She brought it up with a loud gasp and struggled to break free. What do you really intend to do here? Kabuto asked snidely. You are still severely hurt from fighting your cousin. Even if you weren't, I am stronger than most Jonin. You have no chance of changing anything. Why are you doing this? Hinata shouted before her face was dragged underwater again. She brought it up coughing and gagging a couple seconds later. What is your reason for attacking the village? Lee was back on his feet nursing his stomach. Neji had yet to attack him again. I thought that was Orochimaru's goal. Not yours. Is it revenge? Kabuto gave a dark chuckle. Revenge? Nothing as petty as that. Then what the hell are you attacking us for? Naruto was attempting to free his hands, but they were only bleeding more freely the more he struggled. For science. Everyone there, including Neji, raised their eyebrows. I am a researcher. Everything I do is to further progress my hypothesis. I felt no loyalty towards the snake Sanin. I followed him simply because he had the resources and the means for me to conduct whatever experiment I needed. So what is your hypothesis? Hinata spit water from her mouth as she yelled. Can the village of Konohagakure actually fall? Kabuto smiled evilly. Is it possible? This village withstood the strains of the ninja wars despite the odds that it should have fallen. It managed to repress an attack by the Kyuubi multiple times. What is it that allowed for that? Was it this so-called will of fire, great leadership, pure luck? I am interested in testing this for myself and seeing the results firsthand. I think you'll find fate is against you in your endeavor. Neji clearly could still control his speech. Fate. I don't believe in something as half-assed as that. Kabuto roared with laughter. People don't lose. Because it was destiny. Science clearly disproves that theory. Now be a good little pawn and quit mouthing such garbage. Neji grit his teeth as he willed his body to move. No matter how hard he tried, though, it just wouldn't happen. Now, Kabuto continued. I heard something interesting. You really intend to fight him the way you are, Lee-kun? Kabuto smiled as he walked right behind Neji and patted him on the face. If it means I am able to get closer to you and save my best friend, then I will. Lee slowly slid back into his stance. You idiot! Neji shouted. You can't beat me. Kabuto's cynical smile remained plastered on his face. Marvelous, there may not be a crowd to watch anymore, but it looks like the show will go on. Kabuto turned sideways. Proctor, would you mind starting the match? Oh, that's right. I ejected him. I guess I'll do the honors. Kabuto took a couple steps backwards and raised his hand into the air. Hinata was still struggling to get free from the water whips and Naruto's hands had finally gone numb from the pain. Let the final match of Konoha's Chunin exam tournament begin. Lee and Neji both charged forward. Just what the hell is going on? Ino shouted as she and the rest of the remaining rookies stood by the doors as people continued to file out in a panic. Didn't you listen to Kurenai-sensei or Asuma-sensei at all? Shikamaru hated repeating things. The village is under attack and we have to make sure the civilians get out safely. This is so sudden though. Choji was eating his chips even faster than before. I felt one surge of chakra but now nothing. Well, something is coming. Kiba turned his nose to the sky, sniffing. Akamaru was growling. Just then a dozen Zakus came flying low, spraying fire and launching kunai. What the hell? All the genin immediately took cover. Didn't that guy blow up? Sakura looked up from behind a chair that she had hid behind. Shino was right by her. It would appear he has been mass-produced. Much like a toy on an assembly line. Shino's insects were already flying into action. We must engage them to protect the civilians. Us. Ino shouted from an unknown location. Most of the Jonin are gone. Of course it's up to us. Kiba yelled as Akamaru transformed. Gatsuga. He and Akamaru flew at the Zakus but they dodged out of the way. They then veered back and charged at him. Kiba. Sakura shouted as she quickly formed several seals. The Zaku began to swing around out of control as she placed them under a genjutsu. Nice going, Sakura. Kiba yelled as slammed into the ones flying around drunkenly. Everyone else hurry up and help. Kiba is right. We got a couple lucky first hits but this man fought toe-to-toe with the Hyuga genius. Shino landed next to both his teammate. We need to team up to take them all down. Shino. Shikamaru shouted. If you can ground them, do it. Almost everyone had cleared the arena and now only the genin and the attacking Zakus were left. Acknowledged. Shino yelled back. His bugs were flying into action, quickly blinding many Zaku. They don't have an internal chakra source so blinding them is the most I can do. As he said this 3 of the Zakus crashed into the ground. Kage main no jutsu. Shikamaru instantly bound them. Gatsuga. Kiba and Akamaru flew at 2 of them. Nikuden Sensha. Choji was already inflated into a giant ball. He was bouncing down the steps towards the last one. All 3 of them hit their targets at the same time. Move away. Remember they explode. Shino shouted. Not needed to be reminded twice, all 3 of them cleared the area just as the Zakus went off. Shintenshin no jutsu. Ino shouted switched into the body of a Zaku that had stopped moving thanks to a genjutsu by Sakura. The body tumbled towards the ground, out of control. Body expansion. Choji shouted as his arm inflated. He swatted the Zaku into the ground where it exploded a few seconds later. Ino immediately opened her eyes. It's crazy, she shouted, running towards Shikamaru. What are you talking about? He looked at her in annoyance. He had sweat rolling down his face as he held onto another couple. When I entered his mind, I could see the view of all of them at once. They're laying waste to the village. Ino sounded completely panicked. We need to get out of here and help them fight. The civilians, Choji reminded Ino gently. He and Kiba had just destroyed the last couple Zakus that had invaded the arena. There aren't any more here. There are plenty out there though. We need to help them. I agree with her. Kiba stepped forward. Did you see the way we took care of them? We might be the best 6-man 1-dog team force in existence. I also think it would be prudent to lend the others our aid. Shino walked towards them all slowly. You need to think about your health, Shino. Sakura suddenly scolded. You're still not up to full strength since you lost your arm. The situation does not give me time to be concerned about such trivial things. Shino adjusted his glasses, clearly irritated at being underestimated. We don't have time to argue. Shikamaru scratched his head. Let's go, he finally said. They need our help. Yes. Everyone else chorused in agreement. Zaku. Dosu yelled as he ran down the streets of Konoha. He had just broken out of the infirmary, having seen all the flying forms of the boy who was once teammate. Buildings to his left and right were ablaze, broken glass littered the streets, and the only people present were shinobi that fought from the roofs. Zaku. What the hell happened to you? Dosu. 4 Zaku landed down gently right in front of him. I didn't even recognize you without all your face bandages. If I had, I would have tried to kill you instantly. All 4 of them gave a cruel smile as they raised their palms up so they were pointed at him. Zaku. Dosu clenched his fists tight. What did Kabuto do to you? All 4 Zaku broke into a robotic laughter. The sound was eerie and sent shivers down Dosu's spine. That secret weapon that Kabuto has had everyone working on for the last month, that was me. I'm going to be the instrument that takes down this village. Dosu stared in disbelief at his former teammate. You really believe that? He asked quietly. The Zakus lowered their hands slightly in confusion. He's just using you, you fool. Dosu screamed as loud as he could. What do you think is going to happen when your usefulness has run out? Once he frees that fox, you're just fodder like everyone else. Was it worth trading away your body? Silence settled between the 2 or 5 of them. Answer me, Zaku. You talk too much. They raised their arms back up to fire. Not so fast. Spikes of ice propelled forward by a strong gale of wind suddenly impaled all 4 Zakus. They exploded before they were even able to register what happened. Dosu spun around in surprise. You, he shouted as Haku and a blonde girl slowly walked up to him. This that third teammate you just told me about. Tamari eyed Dosu up and down carefully. You should already know him. Haku sighed dramatically. You watched him fight Lee-san in the tournament. You any good without that sound manipulator on your arm? Tamari asked skeptically. Dosu turned away before answering. Don't follow me. He began walking away from the 2 of them. Where are you going? Haku asked as he ran up to him. To stop Zaku. Dosu answered immediately, causing Haku and Tamari to stop and stare at each other in surprise. You know where the real one is? Tamari asked as she also ran to catch up. He should be back at the base. At the very least his mind is. Dosu didn't break stride. How do you know that? Can you be sure there is a real one? Haku was now walking right next to him. Of course there is. The signs are obvious. Dosu finally stopped and turned towards him. What signs? Tamari and Haku asked at the same time. Genjutsu. All 3 turned in surprise. Zabuza stood behind them. One needs a brain that feels senses to be affected by genjutsu. Odds are they are all being controlled by a single brainwave that is being transmitted from Otogaku's closest base. The first exam proctor. Dosu asked in surprise. That's Zabuza sensei to you. Zabuza said as he looked over the 3 genin in front of him. You 2 will need these. He threw Dosu and Tamari headbands with a leaf etched into each to them. What are we going to do with these? Dosu asked suspiciously. Wear them proudly, of course. Zabuza received a strange look from all 3 of them. Team Zabuza's genin team is officially formed and we have been given our first mission. Stop the Otogaku genin Abumi Zaku and protect the village kind enough to take us in. Haku broke into a smile. Guess it is time to return the favor. He turned to Dosu. I thought I told you not to follow me. Dosu felt his voice falter. This is something I have to do. Lead the way, shorty. Temari nudged Dosu in the shoulder. She already bore the Konoha headband on her head. We're a team now. Get used to us. Dosu felt a strange feeling well up inside as he too slipped the Konoha band around his forehead. We're going to need a way to sneak out. There are a lot of enemies. Zabuza chuckled. You leave that to me. Yamato landed nimbly on the roof of a building just outside of the destruction that had been incurred by the overgrowing roots. His knees felt weak as he stared at the carnage in front of him. Dozens of shinobi on both sides already lay dead. Blood and fire were everywhere. Yet still more people were fighting and attempting to murder one another. What a scene. Is this the first time you've experienced war? Hayate asked as he landed next to him. Yamato nodded slowly. I was just a genin when the Third Ninja World War was ending. I never had a chance to go out to the field. Is it always quite this horrific? It is. Hayate nodded honestly, his cough had yet to come back. How could all of these men have snuck in? Could Konoha's detection barrier have fallen? Someone, or several people led them in. Yamato answered as something terrible caught his eye. That man there, he led them in. Hayate turned his gaze and his eyes widened remarkably. So my hunch was right, the same face on our monument. As he spoke, the man they were staring at unleashed another wave of giant roots that began tearing through the ground and sending many shinobi flying, both friend and foe. Shodai-sama, Yamato was hoping he had been wrong, but no one else was capable of producing a wood technique quite like that. He is the general leading this division of forces. Then Hayate drew his blade and slid into a fighting stance. If we defeat him, the whole division will go into disarray. Before Yamato could say anything more, Hayate was gone. Senju Hashirama had never felt more pain in his unbeating heart than at this very moment as he destroyed the village he had helped create and killed the shinobi of this generation. I am sorry, my children. He was running through seals to unleash another deadly attack. He never completed it. A man with a sword and a brown hair appeared right in front of him, swinging horizontally. The man sliced through his arms completely and continued on to hack his whole body in half. Hashirama's hands fell to the ground, followed by his upper body. I am sorry, Shodai-sama. The proctor spoke as he turned towards the downed former leader. I had expected more from you, however. You have made a grave mistake in thinking that attack would finish this body. Hashirama's head spoke from the ground. What? Hayate took a step back as he noticed the hands he had just cut off crumple apart before reforming back onto his arms. The hands finished the seals and roots sprang forth right beneath Hayate's feet. Hang on, Hayate-san. Yamato shouted. Suddenly the roots bent away from the shinobi and instead smashed down onto a group of Otogakure shinobi who had just made it into the village. Impossible, no one alive should be capable of controlling Mokuden. Hashirama's head just reformed onto his body and he was able to gaze at Yamato who stood right in front of him. Forgive me, Shodai-sama. I will have to fight and kill you for the sake of the village. Hashirama smiled sadly. Unfortunately, I am unkillable as I am. The technique that was used to bring me back to life has bound my soul to this body. You must find a way to seal me. How terrible. Yamato felt sick at the explanation of the technique and what he would have to do. It is terrible, but you must find it in yourself to fight and defeat me. Do not mourn over my fate. The controller of this technique will not give me room to be lenient. Hashirama spoke quickly. He needed to pass this information on as fast as possible. Do what you must to protect this village. I am no longer your leader but your sworn enemy who will do whatever I must to crush this place and everyone in it. Shodai-sama, Yamato choked out. He couldn't believe this. He was going to have to fight the man he had idolized more than any other Hokage. It was almost too much to ask. The roots around his feet suddenly sprung to life. Crap. Yamato had let his sentimentality cost him. Hold on. Hayate shouted as he sliced the roots apart and grabbed Yamato, yanking him away all in one fluid motion. I owe you one. Yamato sighed in relief. He had been moments away from being crushed to death. Hayate shook his head. I am convinced now that you are going to have to be the one to win this. Me? Yamato asked in surprise. You are much stronger though. You are the one. I will aid you however I can, but it must be you. Hayate turned back to the Shodai. Are you ready? I don't know. Yamato admitted as he stumbled up. You are not alone, Yamato. A heavy-set man said as he landed behind him. That's right. We'll back you up as well. A blond man landed next to him. It's time for Ino Shikacho to lend their aid to the village. A man that looked like an older version of Shikamaru said as he appeared last. Choza, Inoichi, Shikaku. Yamato turned and saw many more shinobi rushing into the front lines. We'll take care of any fodder. Shodai-sama, no, their leader is up to you. Shikaku said as he jumped into the fray. Good luck. The other two were quick to be after him. Everyone, Yamato's eyes slowly turned resolute. Alright. I don't know how I'll do it, but I'll find a way. He turned towards Hashirama. I hope you are ready, Shodai-sama. I am going to show you that Mokuden has been entrusted in good hands. Kakashi-san, to your left. A man with a hood, raised cuff, and dark glasses shouted as he shoved the copy nin out of the way. He jumped after him just as a series of kunai with explosive tags landed on the spot. They all blew up, engulfing the area in flames. I owe you, General San. Kakashi nodded to the head of the Aburame clan. His Sharingan was still covered as he had to save his strength for the one who blasted down the gate. No problem, Gen replied, his bugs buzzing loudly around him, flying at more Otogaker. Shinobi. Kakashi's fist buried itself into the gut of an Otogaker shinobi. A kunai to the throat put him down for good. With a slopping noise he pulled it out and immediately threw it right in between the eyes of another shinobi. Not many of those robotic genin this far out. Gen noticed as his bug sucked the life out of a group of shinobi. All around the two of them many other battles were also taking place. Shinobi on both sides were dropping fast. It only took one stroke to bring many of them down. No, there isn't. It was just then Kakashi noticed it. A giant vortex of water being formed. Without hesitation he pulled his Sharingan up. He immediately formed the seals and a wall of earth rose up in front of him. The vortex of water flew forward and smashed into the wall, cracking it badly but it still managed to stand. The water that before would have torn through both friend and foe now instead flooded around, creating more of an inconvenience for the fighting shinobi than a deadly force. That's our man. Kakashi jumped over the wall and immediately ran forward. His Sharingan immediately picked up on the man who was none other than the Nadaime Hokage, Senju Toburama. The nearest group of Konoha stood frozen in shock. Don't stand there, you fools. He is the enemy. Kakashi shouted too late. Toburama split them all in half with a blade of water. Kakashi cursed. 6 shinobi dead simply because they were too surprised to move. How many more had been like that at the other gates as well? A Sharingan wielder, but in only one eye. Toburama eyed Kakashi curiously as he approached him. Yo! Kakashi said as he stopped about 30 paces away. What happened to the rest of the Uchiha? It would be best if those with the Sharingan combat me since I specialize in Suiten ninjutsu. Toburama was already running through seals as he talked. Sorry, but the Uchiha won't be showing up today. You'll have to bear with me. Kakashi's eye allowed him to mimic his movements. Neither man bothered to shout the name of their jutsu as another torrent of water formed in front of the Nadaime. Kakashi pulled the water that had been created earlier for his attack. The two blasts of water shot forward into each other and then blasted skywards. Soon a heavy rain poured down on all the shinobi in the current vicinity. How were you revived? Kakashi asked as the Nadaime became visible again. Someone perfected the technique Edo Tensai that I had begun to create. Toburama charged forward and threw a punch. Kakashi blocked it and swung his leg in a sweep. If you know anyone capable of sealing, I suggest you get them over here. However, you'll have to weaken me before that will work. Toburama back-flipped over the sweep and attempted to catch Kakashi with a kick in the air. Kakashi caught his foot and threw the Nadaime straight into a nearby collapsed wall. Kakashi-san, Gen shouted with worry evident in his voice. Kakashi spun around and saw a giant man oozing dark energy coming straight at him. He was tall, dark-skinned and had long orange hair that fell wildly around his body. Gah! The man screamed incomprehensibly. Kakashi blocked the fist that the man threw but was knocked flying by the force behind it. He flew straight into General who was running towards him. They both tumbled to the ground. What is that guy? Kakashi asked as he stumbled to his feet. It's Jugo. Someone from Otogakur shouted in fear. He had no time to react as a Konoha shinobi stabbed him in the back. Jugo. Kakashi turned and watched the man grow strange-looking smokestacks around his body. He had heard rumors of that name. A teenage boy had gone on a rampage and destroyed his home village. So this is how Orochimaru has been making those cursed seals. Obliterate. The man shouted as he suddenly fired a powerful beam of energy right at the two of them. General San, it's time to move, Kakashi said as he jumped out of the way. The Aburame man was quickly after him. They landed on the highest vantage point available, which was a part of the gate that hadn't completely crumbled away. What Kakashi saw caused his eyes to go wide. There were at least 100 of the people exactly like the man that had just attacked the two of them. I think Otogakur just got reinforcements, General made his observation aloud. Kakashi sighed. The Nadaime was up and running at them too. This just keeps getting better and better. Extend. Sarutobi shouted as his pole that had once been Enma shot forward. It was taller than most buildings now and he held it high in the air. He swung it down hard on top of the head of one of the giant snakes that had torn down a wall of the village. The snake's head was sent crashing into the ground before it popped out of existence. Hokage-sama, you shouldn't be here. Leave this to us, a shinobi shouted as he landed next to his leader. Silence. I am not some crippled old man who can no longer fight. If someone dares attack my village, then I will of course be on the front lines. It is my duty as Hokage to defend my home with my life. The pole retracted back to normal length as Sarutobi stepped forward. Kukuku, the old man looked up at the giant purple snake that the voice had come from. It opened its mouth and Orochimaru slid out of it. Brave words for someone as senile as yourself. Orochimaru, how did I know I would find you slithering around here? This is Tobirama-sensei's technique, isn't it? Sarutobi stared with pure contempt at his former pupil. It is indeed. Orochimaru landed on the ground in front of his sensei, pulling out his sword from his mouth as he did. Kabuto seems to have done a fine job. I don't particularly like being a pawn, but I finally have immortality. It would also seem he pulled my men from all over the continent. I would guess there are more men here than even if Tsunagakur had lent their aid. How many of you did he create? Sarutobi asked cautiously, ignoring the latter part of his student's rant. Orochimaru shrugged. Who knows? Aside from myself, I've only seen 3 others. He likely didn't have enough time to gather powerful shinobi from all over the world. You're giving me a lot of information, Sarutobi noted dryly. At least a lot for a man who never gave away anything before. No matter how much you know, it's too late for you to change anything, sensei. I'm telling you because I want you to know how greatly you've failed. What makes you so sure I've failed? Sarutobi already had a feeling he knew the answer. Orochimaru broke into another cackling fit. My snakes, of course, they're slithering all around your village, just eating up the yummy treats such as the children of this village. Sarutobi felt a vein on his head throb. You monster. He pointed his staff right at Orochimaru and fired it forward. Pointless, Orochimaru let the staff pierce him right in the heart. I have no reason to fear death, sensei. You brought this on yourself. You left it to Jonin to kill me. This time I'll fight you myself with my full power and immortality. Sarutobi ignored him as he swung his staff around, with Orochimaru still hanging on it. He slammed the Sannin into one of his snakes, which in turn smashed into a building. The building collapsed and the snake poofed out of existence. Orochimaru slithered his way out of the rubble. I see you didn't bother to call my teammates back. You didn't think I would be here. I had no reason to concern either one of them with the likes of you. Sarutobi's staff retracted back to its normal length. Kukuku, Orochimaru continued to chuckle. You are no match for me, sensei. Orochimaru shouted. As he did, 3 giant snakes slithered forward at the old man at once. That's far enough, a lazy-sounding voice said as the snakes suddenly lost their heads. They vanished in a cloud of smoke before they could even hit the ground. Sarutobi slowly turned his head. You. Asuma stood slightly to the back and right of him. You got business to take care of with this guy, right? Asuma threw out his cigarette as he talked. His chakra knives were in either hand. I'll deal with those giant snakes. Not by yourself, Yuhi Kurenai said as she stepped out from behind him. I'll assist you. Asuma sighed. If you insist. Asuma, thank you. Sarutobi turned back towards Orochimaru. Don't mention it, Dad. Hiyashi tapped his foot impatiently as he waited for the barrier squad to arrive. He had been waiting here and could only watch with his Byakugan as battles broke out all across the village. It irritated him to do nothing while friend and foe cut one another down. Finally, it looked like the barrier squad was approaching. "Here we are," a man with a huge mustache shouted as he and 3 more shinobi landed. Hiyashi turned to them. "Excellent. How soon do you think you can have the barrier down?" The man with the mustache ignored Hiyashi's question and walked up to the barrier. He leaned his face in closely and rubbed his chin as he observed it. Yes, I see." He mumbled quietly to himself for a full antagonizing minute that drove the others mad. Hiyashi cleared his throat and repeated, "Do you think you can take it down?" The mustached man leaned his face away from the barrier and broke loudly into laughter. "The only thing you will hear from me when I'm done is mission success. I hope you speak the truth." Hiyashi spoke coldly. "My daughter and nephew are in there. Not to mention the longer we wait the closer the enemy gets to releasing our village's worst terror." "You heard the man, men." The leader of the barrier squad shouted. "Get to taking this thing down immediately." Hiyashi nodded his approval before he turned around. Just as he did, a man came running around the corner. Or perhaps limping would be a more accurate description. The Otogakure shinobi was leaving a large trail of blood as he moved ever closer to the barrier. His left foot dragged uselessly behind his foot as it appeared to be bent at an odd angle. He had gouges and slashes all across his body, and kunai and shuriken were still stuck in his back. All in all, it was a miracle he could still move. The Hyuga watched him with reserved awe and overall disinterest as the man finally collapsed. He reached his hand forward and placed his open palm on the ground. "Kabuto-sama, I made it." Hiyashi's eyes widened as he watched black marking appear below his hand. "I won't let you," he shouted too late as he whipped a kunai at the dying man. Kuchio's no jutsu, the man breathed his last breath as a single coffin slowly began to rise up in front of him, intercepting the kunai. It opened up and Hiyashi's eyes widened in shock and terror. "It can't be. Why you?" A lone woman stepped out of the coffin. She was dressed in a beautiful kimono. Her blue hair, which would normally have been long, was tied up in a bun behind her head. She had striking purple eyes that before Hiyashi felt like he could stare at forever with love. Now the sight of her made his stomach turn. Kana, his wife that had given birth to 2 beautiful children. How could he be expected to fight her? How was it even possible that she was here? Things were just so wrong. "It's been a long time, my husband," the woman once known as Kana replied. Finally, Hiyashi found his voice as his training kicked in. "So it has." He slowly slipped into his stance as he stared at his wife. "I don't wish to fight you, but I see no other way. Your techniques are of serious danger to the men I am protecting." Kana smiled lovingly at him. "Even in death you make me blush. I am sorry for being so weak that I got brought back by this technique." "How are our daughters?" Hiyashi shook his head. "You've never been weak." He was about to say more, but a set of senbon appeared right in front of his face and he barely managed to deflect them. He then decided it was best to speak quickly before she was forced to attack more too. "Hanabi is growing well. She is strong for her age. Hinata, things have been rough for her, but she has found a great boyfriend. Together she has become a truly great kunoichi. You'd be proud of her." Kana smiled as she pulled more senbon from the sleeves of her kimono. "I'm glad. Feel my fist of youth." Guy's fist smashed a man so hard he crashed into another 3 before they all crashed into a collapsed building. Not one of them ever got up again. "Who's next?" Guy turned towards another group of shinobi who all back away slightly. Before that group could react, Guy was there, spinning so fast he was a green blur. Konoha Senpu. His kick shattered bones and busted organs instantly, ending most of their lives on the spot. Another shinobi ran up from behind. He stabbed at the back of Guy's head only for him to vanish. Too slow. He grabbed the back of the man's head and slammed his face into the ground. Blood splattered in every direction as his head was crushed. "Everyone move forward. We are pushing them back," Guy shouted as he moved on to his next group of opponents. The shinobi of Konoha behind him shouted acknowledgement to his order. Ever since Guy had arrived they had been gaining an overwhelming advantage. "Guy," a voice shouted that sent a shiver down the gown man's spine. "You are still so full of youth despite the fact that you look almost as old as myself." Before Guy could react, a man appeared in front of him and drilled a punch into his stomach that knocked the wind out of him and sent him flying backwards. He hit the ground on his butt and looked in horror at the man that was in front of him. "Hiro-sensei." Guy was practically looking at a carbon copy of himself, but there were a few key differences. The other man stood about an inch taller than Guy and his eyes were darkened by the effect of the jutsu that had brought him back. Guy slowly stood to his feet. How could this happen to you? Undeath is a cruel thing, that's for sure, Guy. Hiro spoke to his former student fondly. I was both hoping I would see you and that I wouldn't when I realized where I was. You've grown so much and that makes me happy, but it breaks my heart that I have to fight you. So the technique that brought the gate down was Asakujaku. Guy shook his head sadly. His hunch had been right. However, before he could say any more, a couple shinobi charged past him. They ran straight at Hiro and rammed him through the chest with two giant-looking kunai. We'll take care of him, Guy-san. They shouted triumphantly. Hiro looked down at them sadly. What I am about to do is most unyouthful, I apologize. Both men widened their eyes in surprise when he spoke as if nothing happened. A minute later though, and the sound of squishing reached their ears. They looked down to see Hiro's arms had disappeared into their chests. Guy felt like throwing up on the spot. His sensei stood in front of him, his arms sticking out the back of his allies, holding their hearts in each hand. Hiro-sensei, this isn't like you. No. Hiro agreed. He dropped the hearts and retracted his hands. Both men dropped dead to the ground. There is no room for youth when you are undead, I'm afraid. He slowly pulled the giant blades from his chest. Guy, you must find a way to put me down. I am sorry to have to ask you this, but it has to be you. Hiro slowly walked forward, his arms dripping the blood of the men he just killed. Guy gulped heavily before nodding. If you ask me to, I'll find a way, Hiro-sensei. After all, I have strived to become a man as youthful as yourself. Please tell me how you think I've done when I've defeated you. That's my youthful prodigy. Hiro nodded in satisfaction as he settled into a Goken stance. Guy settled into his own stance. They both jumped forward faster than the eye could see. Their fists connected with each other. They stepped back and each to the right and swung their legs forward. Their legs connected with one another while high in the air. They both dropped them down and stepped forward, their fists connecting with each other again. Your stance is as good as ever, Guy. Hiro shouted his praise as they continued to match one another's moves. I am glad to see you haven't been slacking since I died. Please. I am far too youthful to slack. As the two of them battled, the other shinobi began to engage in their own battles around the two of them. I am more surprised to see death hasn't worn you out any. Hiro let out a deep-throated laugh. I trust you have taken on a team that has learned the ways of youth. Guy smirked and grabbed Hiro's newest punch. He threw him through the air. Hiro landed nimbly on his feet. You'd be proud of the team I'm training. Guy was immediately running at him. Oh, Hiro asked as he blocked Guy's punch. Tell me about them. First there is Rock Lee. He dresses the exact same way we do. Listen to this though, he can't use ninjutsu or genjutsu at all. He only has taijutsu. He used to be mediocre at that too, but now it is his greatest strength. The two continued to trade blows. Then there is Hyuga Hinata. She is the heiress to her clan, and when I first met her she was one of the least confident people in the world. Now she believes in herself so much she can even break paralysis and beat opponents no one else could ever dream of. Finally is Uzumaki Naruto. He's a special kid alright. Can create more shadow clones than the eye can see. He dreams to become Hokage someday, and at first he was a long way off, but now he is much closer than ever before. The three of them made it to the third exam of the Chunin exams and performed splendidly. Hiro smiled as he and Guy separated again. It sounds like you've found yourself a great team, Guy. Guy smiled brightly at his sensei. This would be the last time he would ever be able to talk to him again. He had to get serious after this. You bet. Chapter 27, Invasion, Part 2. Destruction reigned everywhere as a single woman and who held onto a small girl hurried through the streets of Konoha. She had been enjoying a once quiet day in the village with her daughter while her husband and older son watched the Chunin exams. Now she ran through the streets littered with broken glass and flaming buildings, all the while being chased by a group of the same, strange robotic boy. Where you going, bitch? One of the Zakus let out a mechanical laugh as he propelled himself forward from fire that was spraying from his hands. The woman only ran faster. Suddenly, a kunai landed a ways ahead of her. It exploded with a loud bang and the woman was blown backwards. She turned her body and wrapped her arms tightly around her daughter as she smashed into the ground. Four Zakus slowly walked up and smiled sadistically down at her. Please, just let my daughter go." The little girl was sobbing painfully as the woman looked up at the robotic boys with a tear-stricken face of her own. One of the Zakus slowly bent down and looked at her, his face dead serious. The woman began to crawl backwards in fear, but Zaku latched onto her arm. The sadistic smile was back. "I'll take her off your hands." He reached forward and grabbed onto the girl and began to yank her from her mother's grasp. "No. Please. She's just a child," the woman shouted and pleaded as she held onto her daughter with all her might. "Shut up." Zaku's face scowled for a split second as he smacked the woman in the face and yanked the small girl free. "Mommy." The small girl shouted as she reached for her to no avail. Zaku smiled. "You'll never see mommy again, brat." Zaku's stomach opened and he reached into his stomach and pulled out a kunai. "No." The woman got up but was battered back down by two other Zakus. They each pinned an arm to the ground. "Enjoy the show," they said together in the same mechanical voice. "Please." The woman couldn't see anything at all as her tears blurred her vision. The next thing she heard, however, surprised her. "What the hell?" all four Zakus said simultaneously. "Why can't I move?" "Kiba. Choji. They're bound," Shikamaru shouted as he sat perfectly still, his hands still in the form of a seal. "About damn time," Kiba shouted as he ran forward and immediately ripped the girl from Zaku's arms. "I got you, ma'am." Choji pulled the woman out from the underneath the other two Zakus. She was sobbing harder now, mumbling barely coherent words of thanks. "Like hell am I going to let you dickheads get away with this?" All four Zakus present began glowing yellow. "Get out of there." Sakura ran towards them, but it was too late. All four Zakus violently exploded, sending pieces of metal and debris everywhere. Sakura and everyone else covered their faces to protect themselves from the heat. "No!" Ino shouted as stared at the smoke that occupied the spots where her friend and teammate had just been. Akamaru, still shaped like Kiba, began sniffing loudly. He turned his head to the left and gazed upwards and gave a loud bark. Everyone followed his gaze. On top of the roof stood Shino, and laying next to him in a heap were Kiba, Choji, and the mother and daughter. "Damn," Kiba rubbed his back as he sat up. "That was a painful ride, but I have to hand it to you, it saved our asses." He turned and smiled up at Shino, who had used his insects to save them by picking them up and dropping them off on the roof just before the explosions went off. Shino merely nodded down at him. It would appear they are unharmed. Shikamaru, who had been tense just moments ago, relaxed his shoulders. "I need food." Choji raised his arm into the air as he gasped for breath. The mother and daughter sat on top of his stomach, looking completely bewildered by the sudden change of events. "Are you okay?" Shino bowed slightly as he stuck his one hand forward to help them up. You boys," the woman began, choking on her words as tears began to slide down her face again. "You saved us." She jumped forward and tackled Shino in a hug. "Well, it wasn't anything special." Shino rubbed his head in embarrassment. It was rare that someone was willing to hug him. "Geez, look at the hero over here." Kiba laughed from where he sat before he too was tackled by the daughter, who was also sobbing heavily. "Gah." Choji sat up and began taking in huge gulps of air now that the weight was off his body. "Somebody save us." The sound of people screaming from a few streets down reached the ears of everyone there. "Get them down and join us ASAP." Shikamaru shouted as he and the others on the ground took to the roofs to save the other people in need. "You heard him." Shino adjusted his glasses as his bugs began to gently let them all down. "We have to hurry and save others. If you keep running, you'll be to the shelter in just a couple blocks," Kiba said as he stood up, the girl in his arms. "You'll make it for sure, and if not, just holler and we'll be there to save you again." "Thank you all so much," the woman continued to sob words of thanks into Shino's now drenched shoulder. "Or Genin of Konohagakure," Choji said as he stumbled up. The other two nodded. "Saving people is what we do." Lee and Neji charged straight at each other inside the barrier that split them off from everyone else in Konoha. Naruto remained pinned to the cross, and Hinata, who had just quit struggling against the water ropes, held her head above the surface to watch. Meanwhile, Kabuto just continued to smile as evilly as ever. "Take this fist of youth," Lee shouted as he threw the strongest punch he could in his weakened state. Neji ducked under it and continued forward, bringing his palms out in a thrust. "Lee, you fool. You can't beat me." Lee turned his body sideways and just barely dodged the Juken strike. He held his elbow high and brought it down. There is only one way to prove you wrong and save my friend. Neji's forearm blocked the strike. He knocked Lee's elbow back up with such force that he stumbled backwards. It's not about right and wrong. Neji yelled as his Juken connected with Lee's stomach, sending the genin splashing into the ankle-deep water. He is a Jonin controlling my body. I might as well be stronger than normal. Meanwhile you are completely worn out. Fate isn't on your side in this, Lee. Shut up. Lee rose up to his feet. Even if I did believe in fate and knew it was against me, you think I would just sit here and do nothing? He glared darkly at his ex-teammate. I will push myself past my limits and destroy fate with my own 2 hands. Neji's eyes widened as he stared at the one boy who he had come closest to calling friend. So be it, Lee. If my body crushes you, I have nothing to do with it. That is the curse of fate that now binds me. Hinata was right, Lee said as he slipped into a stance that made it look like he was ready to start a race. You simply use fate as an excuse to hide behind. Neji was surprised. Lee's voice had come from above, but he was still right in front of him. His body jumped backwards on its own accord just before Lee's foot smashed into the ground, sending water spraying everywhere. Neji blinked a couple times as the water hit his eyes. When his vision cleared, he saw 5 different Lees all around him. You're using afterimages again. I'm surprised you have the speed for that. Neji replied in monotone as his body automatically reacted and blocked Lee's next attack. The image of Lee in front of him was smiling. I do not need to open a single gate to perform such a trick. Lee's voice jumped to a new location every word. Meanwhile, an image of himself remained behind. You know the problem with afterimages? Kabuto asked loudly. Lee didn't respond as he appeared behind Neji with his foot high in the air. They make it easy to predict your next move. A wall of earth rose up right next to Neji and Lee's foot slammed into it. Yow! Lee was skipping and holding onto the foot that had smacked into the wall. He hadn't even noticed Neji form the seals for that move, it had been so quick. I told you, Lee. You're a fool. Neji spun around in a sweep that caught Lee while he was still skipping. Lee was flipped so his body was horizontal with the ground, and as he began to fall, Neji drilled his elbow into his solar plexus. Lee spit blood as he was slammed full force into the ground at Neji's feet. If you had kicked at him at your full strength, you would have easily shattered that wall. However, you held back for fear of hurting your friend. Kabuto cackled as he clapped his hands. Your previous words and your current actions are contradicting each other. I thought you would said you would fight him to save your friend. This isn't a fight, it's a pummeling. Lee didn't move from the water or give an answer. He appeared to be unconscious. Kabuto's face suddenly twisted into one of boredom. Finish him off, Neji. I thought I would get some good entertainment before I had to get serious, but it would appear I was mistaken. No, Hinata shouted. Don't worry. I'll bring him back to life. I'm capable of it, after all. Kabuto chuckled as he turned and began walking towards Naruto. He stopped just in front of the blonde. Are you ready, Naruto-kun? Naruto gave him a feral grin. Try whatever the hell you want. The fox is staying inside me. I've protected this village for 13 years and I'm sure as hell not about to fail now. Kabuto smirked as he gazed at each of Naruto's hands, which still dripped blood down onto the wooden cross. As I explained earlier, I am before anything, a scientist. I was also Orochimaru's personal doctor, and as such, surgery happens to be a specialty of mine. You plan to cut the fox out of me? Naruto continued to hold his feral smile. Precisely. Kabuto reached into his back pouch and pulled out a kunai in the shape of a scalpel. You can think of this cross that you are bound to as a special operating table which allows me extract special chakra, in this case, your prisoner. That extraction may have to wait, your pawn is about to be knocked for a loop. Kabuto spun around at Naruto's words. Neji had slowly walked up to Lee, raised his foot above his face. I really am sorry, Lee. He brought his foot down. A moment later and he was dazed and flying high in the air. What? Kabuto's amused smile returned. Looks like I might get some more entertainment after all. He had just barely caught a glimpse of what had happened. Lee had reacted to Neji's strike by punching the bottom of his sandal with such force that it had sent the Hyuga genius flying. Never think I am down. Lee appeared in the air in front of his opponent. You idiot. You should have gone for Kabuto. He was wide open. Neji brought his arms together in an X just in time. Lee's fist smashed into his guard and sent him flying towards the ground. Neji began running through seals. As he approached the earth he stuck his hands out. His palms hit the ground and then the rest of his body did, but instead of smashing against it and creating a splash of water, mud was flung everywhere. Neji had turned the ground to mud to soften his blow. His mud-covered form got to his feet. Neji wanted nothing more than to wipe himself down or at least shake some of it off, but he wasn't the one in control. This is an official match, Neji. I cannot abandon it. Lee landed not too far from him. He appeared to stand much higher now as Neji was knee-deep in mud while he was only ankle-deep in water. Kabuto clapped loudly. That is a good fake answer, but I'm not buying it. The real reason you are fighting your friend is because it keeps me from making a move. You've realized that it is hard for me to multitask both minds at once, and so you are keeping that body busy and ultimately buying yourself time for someone to break in and save you. Lee cursed internally. He had been figured out. Of course, I could easily focus both his mind and my own on the same task of killing you, but this is much more amusing. Kabuto adjusted his glasses. Now fight for me, my pawns. Neji completed another set of seals and even more mud began to crawl up his body, completely covering him from head to toe, leaving only his eyes visible. The mud then hardened. Rock armor. Lee's bushy brows shot up in surprise. This was the true purpose behind Kakashi-sensei teaching Doton. Neji stepped up from the mud hole he was in. Doton is the best ninjutsu for defending. Combine that with my already powerful defensive capabilities and I become untouchable. No matter how much speed you have, it won't help you. That is how powerful I've become. Lee shook his head. Having power is not what makes you strong, Neji. I can still win this. Neji scowled. He didn't want to be fighting right now, but Lee's attitude was getting on his nerves anyways. Not more of that believe in yourself garbage. He replied snidely. You should try it sometime. Lee was off at his rival a second later. Neji raised his hand and blocked Lee's punch with his palm. Lee stepped back and let out another yelp. Before he could move, Neji stepped forward and buried his palm in Lee's gut. Lee stumbled backwards but managed to stay standing. Blood rolled out from the corners of his mouth. That was a Juken strike as well. Not only does my armor protect me from all kinds of physical attacks, but it lets me use my own attacks at will. Neji was running at Lee as he talked. This is why it would be best if you just quit before I killed you. You know I cannot give up. Lee stepped backwards and dodged Neji's first swing. He knocked Neji's second attack to the side and spun around, delivering a strong kick to Neji's head. It connected, but Neji didn't even flinch. You're out of strength, Lee. Neji knocked Lee's foot aside and swung forward. Lee vanished a second later. I am not out of speed. Lee shouted as he appeared behind him. Kaden. Lee was blown backwards by Neji's spiraling shield. He landed on his feet and was gone a second later. Give up, Lee. Don't make me hurt you. Quit sprouting the same line. Lee appeared next to spinning shield and kicked at it again. He bounced back lightly before attacking it again. He was once again repelled back a couple feet. This time he skid to a stop. He looked up and Neji's rotation was still active, but he felt a sudden jolt of pain in his shoulder. A second later and it looked like Neji was charging at him. Lee was knocked down hard as he felt an invisible attack hit his face. The time delay genjutsu. Lee cursed and rolled through the water away from Neji, who appeared to him to be punching where he had just been. He was suddenly picked up by what felt like a kick and sent skipping across the water. Lee. Neji's voice was pleading now. Please, you don't have what it takes to break a genjutsu. So what? Lee pulled himself up slowly, agonizingly. If I perceive everything 2 seconds slower, then that just means I have to be 2 seconds faster. As he talked, Neji already appeared to be running forward. Lee breathed in deeply and closed his eyes. His mind slowly emptied out as he erased all sense of feeling. He could no longer hear Neji's steps as he ran at him. He couldn't see him as he pulled his Juken strike back. The only thing he could feel was his body, his breathing. The way his fist felt when he clenched it tightly. I can do this, only his voice filtered through. Neji pulled his palm back. This may be the end, Lee. He only wished he could close his eyes as he swung forward. He couldn't watch as he pummeled someone to death without being in control anymore. Neji and Kabuto's eyes widened in surprise as Neji's attack was deflected. Before he could even ask how, he had Lee's fist right in his face. His mud armor cracked apart around his upper body and he was jarred backwards. I felt it connect. Lee slowly opened his eyes. Yosh, I can do this. He ran forward and swung his fist. Neji raised his arm to block Lee's attack, but Lee suddenly passed through him and another one from behind the first delivered a powerful kick that connected with his ribs. Neji's mud armor cracked apart more and this time whole pieces went flying off. Kabuto's smile got bigger. Interesting, he used his afterimage ability as a screening for his attack. Not only that, but he is fighting on par with someone while 2 seconds behind. Hinata smiled despite the situation. Lee Senpai has memorized the patterns of attack used in the Juken style. It's that memory that is letting him predict Neji's moves. Neji ducked under Lee's kick. He then swung at him with both palms. Lee placed his hands on top of Neji's outstretched arms and used them to flip himself into the air. What? As Lee completed his flip, he brought the bottom of his foot into the back of Neji's head. He pushed off with all his might and slammed Neji's face straight into the ground. The mud armor around Neji's whole upper body crumpled away completely with that blow. Lee landed a few feet away and spun around. He was immediately running forward again. Kaden. Neji activated his spinning shield as Lee jumped in the air and began spinning around at incredible speeds himself. Konoha Senpu. Lee's kick had been flying at the reverse of Neji's spin, and so when it connected it immediately stopped Neji's spin hard. Neji felt his whole body lock up from the force of his rough stop. Impossible, not only did he predict that I would use the Kaden, but he even put enough speed behind his kick to stop it. Neji. Lee shouted as he stepped forward and swung his fist with all his might. Neji's body was still locked up and he could do nothing as Lee's fist buried itself in his unprotected cheek. He was slammed into the water with a huge splash. Lee stood triumphantly over his body, panting heavily. Neji felt his arms try to move upwards on their own, but they collapsed back down. His body had it. Lee had won. No one breathed a word for a whole 30 seconds as Lee and Neji stared hard at each other. Finally, Lee broke the silence. Neji, is my time back to normal? He asked hopefully. Neji sighed in exasperation. He wished he hadn't because water leaked into his mouth. He spit it out immediately. Idiot. Of course your time is back, I can't even move. Lee let out a breath he looked like he had been holding. Good. That will make things much easier. He turned towards Kabuto. You can't really mean to fight him, look how worn out you are. Neji attempted to reason with his ex-teammate once again. You couldn't even open the gates when you fought me. Lee shook his head. I chose not to open them. What? Neji's eyes widened in surprise. Neji. Lee said. You know what the biggest difference between you and everyone else I fought is? Neji's silence was answer enough. The biggest difference between you and them was they tried their hardest. Everyone else put forth everything they could and mustered all the strength in their bodies. They put countless hours into training believing it would pay off one day. Lee closed his eyes. The images of Naruto, Gosu and Haku all came to his mind instantly. You do not do that. You work at things the minimal amount and master it. Lee turned and looked at him. You can blame it on fate all you want, but there is only one thing keeping you from overcoming that seal that binds your movements. And that one thing is yourself. Mokuden no Jutsu. Yamato and Hashirama shouted at the same time. More giant branches of trees ripped their way from the ground, cracking the concrete and splitting the buildings. The battling shinobi who were standing there were forced to move or risked getting caught in the attack. The massive roots slammed into each other, but Hashirama's broke through and continued on towards Yamato. My ability isn't strong enough, Yamato cursed as he jumped out of the way of the winding branches. Suddenly many small branches broke free from the large one and shot straight at him. Before Yamato could react he was bound completely. I've got you. Hayate jumped upwards and sliced the branches binding him apart. They both fell towards the ground and landed nimbly on their feet on top of one of the many giant branches that covered the streets of Konoha now. Thanks. Yamato sighed in relief. He thought he had been done for. I told you I would back you up, thanks are not necessary. Hayate held his blade at the ready. More branches were coming at them. Can you cut me a path through? Yamato took a running stance. I'm going to have to try to make up for his power with speed. Of course I can. Hayate immediately began to run at the many branches that were converging on them. Yamato was right behind him as he hacked and sliced his way through the numerous wooden appendages. More and more of them kept coming though, and soon they were completely surrounded by wood that threatened to crush the life of them out of them at any moment. "Get down!" Hayate shouted as he raised his blade high. Yamato dove to the floor just in time. Hayate swung his blade in a complete circle and all the branches around them fell apart seconds later. Yamato rolled to his feet and was back off instantly. Hashirama stood on the largest root that came from the ground and Yamato was forced to jump a whole couple stories just to reach him. He landed in front of the former Hokage in a crouch. "Impressive that you made it this far." Hashirama brought his hands up in the form of a seal as he talked. "I won't let you." Yamato extended his hand forward and wood shot from his arm and immediately bound Hashirama's hands together in a wooden box. "You can't form seals like that," he said as he charged forward. "Binding my Mokuden with Mokuden is a smart move." Hashirama nodded in appreciation at Yamato as he slid one leg back slightly. "I am honored to be praised by you." Yamato jumped in the air and kicked at his idol. The Shodai raised the wooden block and Yamato's kick connected with that, skidding the Shodai back from the force. Yamato landed and swung a fist at him next. Hashirama ducked and moved forward, bringing his head up as he did, catching Yamato in the chin and knocking him backwards. Before Yamato had a chance to recover, he felt the Shodai's foot bury itself into his stomach. To keep himself from falling backwards, Yamato shot out two spikes of wood from his hands that he used to anchor himself to the giant branch they fought on. "I guess I was too full of myself for thinking I could best you in taijutsu even with your hands bound." Yamato pulled the small spikes up and held them as two small spears in each hand. "Maybe so, but you use your Mokuden wisely. You know you are not as powerful as I am with it, so you use it in little ways that work well. It may be rude of me, but I failed to catch the name of the successor of my ability." Shodai-sama. Yamato felt his mouth go dry at the praise he received from his idol. "Your name?" Hashirama repeated as he ran forward. "They refer to me as Yamato now." He brought his spears up and blocked the Shodai's two-handed swing. Both of his spears were splintered apart and the Shodai's attack carried on towards his face. "Out of the way." Hayate shoved Yamato to the right and then jumped to the left. Hashirama's attack missed completely and he turned to look at the swordsman before charging at him. "No you don't." Yamato shouted as 8 square branches of wood sprout from both of his arms and zigzagged towards the Shodai. "Your opponent is me, if that is what you wish." Hashirama spun around and prepared for the wood attack. Before he had a chance to react though, he felt Hayate's blade pierce him in the heart from his back. As the blade exited from his chest, he brought his bounded hands backwards and sliced them free. Shit, Yamato and Hayate realized at the same time the mistake they made. Mokuden no Jutsu. The wood from Yamato's arm veered off as Hashirama took control of them. They spread around him and then closed back in right on Hayate, who was directly behind. Hayate went to pull his blade out and jump away, but the Shodai grabbed onto the part still protruding from his chest. "What?" Hayate let his surprise cost him as his body was battered from all sides by Yamato's attack. He fell to the ground in a bloody mess. "Hayate-san," Yamato shouted as he began to run for his fallen comrade. "Now is not the time to get distracted." The Shodai shouted as another giant root ripped apart the ground behind him. It stood 10 stories straight tall before flung itself towards the ground like a giant tentacle. "You won't do that. It'll crush you too." Yamato already knew it was pointless as he yelled it. The Shodai would just regenerate while he and Hayate would be crushed. "I got you guys." A giant Chusa yelled as he moved forward and grabbed onto the branch. "Chusa-san." Yamato was so glad to see the big man lending him aid. Kage Nui no Jutsu. The Shadaime was bound by a set of black tentacles that sprung from the ground a second later. "Yamato. Get Hayate out from there." Shikaku was crouched down a little ways behind Chusa. "Right." Yamato nodded gratefully and ran forward. Just then though, the sound of more roots breaking free from the ground caused him to turn around. On either side of Chusa, 2 giant roots rose that were just as tall as him. Oh boy, Chusa could do nothing as he was already having trouble holding onto one root. The other 2 wrapped around his waist and legs and pulled him backwards and then slammed him into the ground. His body crushed many buildings and many shinobi who weren't able to move in time. Not good. Shikaku also lost control of his shadow sewing technique when he lost Chusa's shadow. Before he was able to make another move, a bunch of miniature roots sprout up from below his feet. He was bound and slammed into the ground only a moment later. The giant root that Chusa had been holding began descending again. I won't let you crush him. Yamato ran through more seals. The root slowed its descent towards the ground and just as it was 10 feet above them it stopped completely. Yamato dropped to his knee, panting heavily and sweat rolling from his forehead and off his chin. Hayate-san, get up. Hurry. He knew that Hayate couldn't hear him but he spoke anyways. Hayate groaned as he slowly opened his eyes and began to pick himself back up. His vision was still incredibly dark, he thought as he sat up. Then he realized it wasn't his vision that was dark but he was inside of a giant shadow. He immediately looked above him and saw a giant root looming terrifyingly over his head. I suggest you move. Yamato and I are wrestling for control over the root. It is only a matter of moments before I win. Hashirama spoke from directly in front of the shinobi. But he'll be crushed too. Hayate said aloud as he stumbled to his feet. A sacrifice he seemed prepared to make to save your life. The Shodai turned his head slightly to gaze at the swordsman. So what will you do now? A foolish question, I'll save him and myself. Hayate immediately ran past the Shodai and towards Yamato. What are you doing? Yamato shouted. Get out from under here. Not without you. Hayate ran up next to him. You are the one who must defeat him. Yamato chuckled darkly. Defeat him? How? He's invincible. It's a miracle we've managed to last this long. Nothing is impossible and no one is invincible. I'm sure you'll find a way. Hayate bent down and rested his hand on Yamato's shoulder. We need to both survive first though. He turned his gaze back up towards the massive root that could crush them at any second. I'm losing it. Sweat was beginning to pool at the spot Yamato was kneeled at. The root gave a sudden lurch and Hayate narrowed his eyes. He stood up straight and angled his sword. Damn it! Yamato roared as he lost control. The root slammed down on top of the other one, enveloping them both and creating a loud crash. Yamato! Hayate! Shikaku yelled from where he remained bound. The sight of shimmering to the side caught his eyes. He turned to see a barrage of shuriken and kunai flying at him. Protect him! Another group of shuriken came from behind and collided with the first group. All of them landed uselessly in front of Shikaku's face. Phew, too close, too close. He breathed a sigh of relief. The roots around him finally loosened up, probably because the Shodai had been crushed. He easily wiggled his way out and then ran towards the spot where Yamato and Hayate had been. Where do you think you're going? A group of Otogakur shinobi landed in front of him. Kage Nui no Jutsu. His shadow shot forward and black spikes speared the men before they even knew what happened. He didn't even break pace and immediately reached the two roots. When he reached the top of the newest one he was surprised to see a giant fissure in the spot where the two of them had been. Just as he saw it a hand reached out and grabbed onto the ledge around. A moment later and Hayate's panting face appeared. He pulled himself up until his waist was out and then he gave a mighty heave. Yamato's face appeared above next and he placed both arms over top of the ledge. You guys are alright. Shikaku ran forward and knelt down next to the two panting men who were both completely out of the fissure. That your work? He nodded towards the swordsman. Hayate nodded back. I barely made it. These roots are stronger than most rock. That's our Shodai for you. Yamato was chuckling as he fell down on his back. He gazed at the sky and began laughing even louder. We made it. It's not over yet. Hayate rose to his feet. We have to find a way to defeat him. ... But how? He's immortal. Shikaku rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Besides, even if he wasn't, the Shodai has the body of the sturdiest tree. It would take a great power to bring him down if he was even alive. What did you say? Yamato asked as he bolted up suddenly. Shikaku looked at him in surprise. It would take a great power to bring him down. No, before that. Yamato was on his feet now, his eyes wide. The Shodai has the body of the sturdiest tree. That's it. That's the answer. Shikaku and Hayate looked at each other and then back at him. What's the answer? They asked at the same time. Yamato opened his mouth to say more but the sound of wood splintering apart stopped him as the Shodai busted free from where he had been imprisoned. No time to explain. I need you two to back me up as I prepare my technique. What are you going to do? Shikaku asked in exasperation. Let it go. Hayate placed his hand on Shikaku's shoulder. He's found the answer. We'll leave it to him. He turned to the Shodai. Here he comes. Hashirama was running at them while going through even more seals. More branches sprout out from the wood they were fighting on and launch towards them. Shikaku clucked his teeth. Fine. You better hurry, Yamato. I'm already on it. Yamato had his eyes closed and held a single seal. Both men could feel an incredible amount of chakra surging from his body. Let's go, Hayate said as he turned and began running forward. Damn, no choice. Shikaku ran through a set of seals. Kage Nui no Jutsu. His shadow sprang to life once. Again. Anytime a branch approached Yamato, his shadow needles would strike at it. Hayate chopped and slashed his way forward towards the Hashirama. Within seconds he made it to the man. This fight ends now. Hayate brought his sword up high and swung it down. I hope for the village's sake, it does. Hashirama stepped to the side and dodged the sword. Hayate immediately stopped his sword and changed its direction, forcing him to jump over it now. He performed a flip in the air and brought his foot down over the top of Hayate's head. Hayate held his sword up, but the Shodai continued his attack forward. Hayate's sword sliced through his leg at the knee, but the foot continued forward and smashed the swordsman right in the nose. Hayate stumbled backwards, and by the time he settled back into his stance, Hashirama's leg was already reattached. Crafty, using that regeneration to your advantage like that. If only I had any say in the matter. Hashirama stepped forward but jerked to a stop. His whole body went rigid. Hayate looked at him in amazement as a small twig broke free from the skin at the Shodai's skin. The twig continued to grow and then a small leaf sprouted on it. Suddenly, many other small twigs began to break away from his body. Hashirama reached his hand forward and touched one. Ah, I see. What an interesting strategy. Hashirama turned his eyes toward Yamato. Shikaku's eyes widened. I see, it takes a senju's cells to create the wood techniques. You're taking control of the cells in his body to permanently change him. Yamato nodded as he opened his eyes. I just hope I have the chakra to finish this. That won't be necessary, the metamorphosis is already underway. Allow me to help you. The Shodai raised his fingers up and formed a seal. Suddenly a boom of chakra erupted across the area. What's he doing? Yamato almost lost control of his technique in his surprise. He's going to destroy what I'm trying to do. Shikaku shook his head. Just watch. The small twigs suddenly sprang to life and continued to grow much faster. Soon the Shodai was completely covered in a twisting mass of wood that was beginning to extend towards the sky. Leaves began to sprout from the top and roots shot forward from the bottom and smashed their way into the ground. We got to move, Hayate shouted as he ran up to the two of them. He noticed that all other shinobi in the area were already fleeing the scene. The technique, Yamato protested. It's already beyond your control. Shikaku grabbed onto him and yanked him backwards. We're moving, now. Yamato nodded dumbly as he saw the trunk of the massive growing tree expand closer and closer towards them. They all turned and immediately began to retreat deeper into the village. Elsewhere in the village, Kakashi and the Nadaime turned their heads as they saw the giant tree continuing to grow much taller than the buildings of Konoha. Brother, so you're leaving one last gift to the village. Tobarama smiled as he looked at it. The tree finally stopped growing, but it was already hundreds of stories high, making it visible to everyone in the village no matter where they were. Not only was it high, but its branches were huge, hanging deep into the village. Big, lush green leaves covered the whole top of it. All fighting in the village temporarily stopped as everyone turned to look at it. Yamato stared in amazement at it. Did I do that? His knees buckled and he slipped down to them. Shikaku smiled from next to him. Kind of. You started the process. Shodai-sama merely finished it. When he channeled all that chakra into his already morphing cells, he greatly strengthened the effects. You could say he found his own way out. Hayate sheathed his sword. How was he capable of doing that against the Reviver's will? Shikakau scratched his head. He probably cheated the jutsu. He channeled the chakra in order to perform a powerful technique, knowing that his chakra would do this instead. Shikaku opened his mouth to say more, but a heavy breeze passed through the area. The leaves of the giant tree rustled. Individually the leaves were quiet, but the millions of them together made a loud noise audible to those below. That wasn't what caused Shikaku to quit speaking, however. No, what caused him to stop talking were the strange tiny glowing orbs that fell from the tree. Is this snow? A random nearby shinobi asked. Idiot. Have you ever seen green snow? Another shinobi asked. Then what is it? Hell if I know. Before the two could continue, an explosion pulled everyone back to their senses. The Otogakur shinobi had gotten over their surprise and were attacking again. They all rushed forward into battle. Yamato landed down from the building just as an exploding tag landed in front of him. Shit. He had no chance of dodging. The tag exploded and he covered his face, waiting to be incinerated, yet nothing happened. Huh. Yamato slowly lowered his hands and opened his eyes. The green orbs in front of him shimmered brightly. Zaku stood with his back to a wall as the rookies surrounded him. They didn't dare attack him though, for he held a kunai to a young man's throat. Help me, the man begged. Quiet. Zaku pressed the kunai tighter to him. Let him go. Kiba shouted. Zaku began chuckling. Then he broke into wild laughter. Say goodbye. You couldn't save everyone. He began glowing yellow just as the green orbs began to fall around the section of the village they stood in as well. Zaku exploded. No. Everyone shouted at once. The man disappeared in the explosion. Kiba dropped to his knees and slammed his fist into the ground. Damn it, damn it, damn it. He shouted as he continued to punch the ground. Sakura and Ino averted their eyes sadly. Everyone, Shino's voice was laced with awe, not an expression often heard from him. So naturally everyone turned to see what he was staring at. The man who had been caught in the explosion lay unconscious on the crowd, but otherwise completely unharmed. What the hell happened? Multiple people asked at once. Just then they saw all the Zakus in the area immediately taking off towards the giant tree located towards the edge of the village. They all immediately jumped to the highest nearby roof. It wasn't only the Zakus. Every single shinobi in the village, friend or foe, was making their way with great haste to the tree. Shikamaru rubbed his chin. Whatever just happened has to do with that tree. That means it has to be defended no matter what. We're going to, aren't we? Shino sounded apprehensive about the idea. Of course. Kiba and Akamaru were already off. Kiba. Wait. Sakura was after him a moment later. Soon the rest of the genin were after them. Yamato. Yamato immediately stopped running and looked around. That had been Hashirama's voice. Shodai-sama. Yamato felt kind of stupid. He had seen the Shodai turn into a tree. There was no way he was talking to him. No one else had obviously heard it as everyone was running past him and towards the tree. Yamato, this is my final gift towards the village I love so much. Yamato realized a moment later that he wasn't crazy and that the Shodai's voice was coming from the green orbs. This jutsu doesn't have enough power to protect everyone, but anyone not bearing a weapon I can protect from harm. Hashirama's voice continued quickly. These orbs are what saved me too, then. Yamato realized now why he was still alive. I owed you a special favor. You are the only shinobi this jutsu will be able to protect. Yamato's face fell at that. You shouldn't have wasted it on me. He shouted at the orbs. No, I wanted it to be you. Yamato's eyes widened in surprise. Yamato, I'm glad Mokuden was entrusted to you. I can rest knowing it is in good hands. Yamato. The wood user jumped in surprise as Kakashi landed next to him. What's going on here? The copy ninja asked. Civilians everywhere are suddenly being saved by these strange green orbs. It's Shodai-sama, Yamato choked out, his vision slightly clouded by tears. He's protecting the village. So it is that tree. How youthful. Guy landed next to both of them a moment later. They all turned towards the massive trunk of the tree. Hundreds of Konoha shinobi stood on its roots and on its trunk. Yet hundreds of Otogakur shinobi were charging at it. The sight of the Nadaime and Hayate fighting caught Kakashi's eyes. I got to go. He immediately took off towards the trunk. Yamato and Guy were about to follow, but Hiro landed in front of them. Oh my god, you're multiplying. Yamato shouted in terror as he jumped backwards. How rude. Hiro laughed loudly, contradicting the words he just spoke. I'm afraid the controller of my body won't allow me to let you pass here, Guy. If you want to protect the tree, you're going to have to stop me first. Fine by me. Guy settled into his fighting stance. Yamato. Get to the tree. Protect Shodai-sama's final memory with your life. Right. Yamato nodded. He flipped up to the roof of the nearest uncollapsed building and moved onwards towards the tree. He looked back just in time to see Guy and Hiro begin to exchange blows. He landed on the tree and immediately was swarmed by a group of Otogakur shinobi. Mokuden no Jutsu. The wood of the tree they were fighting on sprang to life and immediately sucked the group in front of him into itself. Nice, Yamato smiled at how little chakra the technique had taken. The tree had supplied most of it for him. While fighting here, he was at the advantage. The sound of fire reached his ears just moments later. He turned and saw every single Zaku in the village getting closer to the tree. Stop them. A hailstorm of kunai and shuriken immediately wiped out the first wave, but there were still hundreds more on the way. Yamato sighed. He had just fought and won against the Shodai, and yet all that had done was centered everything on one area, giving him no time to rest. I guess this is what it means to be at war. You aren't going any farther. Hiruzen shouted as he slammed his pole into Orochimaru's body, blasting him backwards and through a couple buildings. Asuma and Kurenai landed down next to him. We took care of the snakes, Asuma said as he readied his blades again. Things had gotten much quieter over here now. They were probably the only 4 shinobi not at the tree right now, and if they had their way Orochimaru wouldn't be getting even a single step closer. The house that Orochimaru had finally stopped in exploded as a group of giant snakes were summoned from the inside of it. Asuma sighed. So much for having taken care of the snakes. I leave it to you, son. Hiruzen gave him a small smile. Yeah, take advantage of my kindness. Asuma nodded to Kurenai, who was already preparing another genjutsu for the snakes. Sarutobi-sensei. Orochimaru appeared in front of the old shinobi, his eyes flared with fury and his sword swinging down. You are quick to anger as always, Orochimaru. Sarutobi spun his staff around and knocked Orochimaru's blade to the side. Before Orochimaru could react, he spun it the other way and it smashed the Sannin in the throat. Orochimaru gagged and began to cough so badly he doubled over and spit went flying. A second later and his whole body heaved. Suddenly he spit out another one of himself that had the lower half of a snake. Now you're mine. Sarutobi wasn't able to do anything as Orochimaru's surprise attack caught him off guard. Orochimaru sliced right through him with his blade, only for him to burst into smoke. A shadow clone. Doden. Doryuden no Jutsu. Orochimaru spun around to see the head of a mud dragon spraying a group of mud bullets at him. Kaden. Karyuden no Jutsu. Hiruzen then spit fire from his mouth onto the muddy bullets, creating balls of molten fire that rained down on the Sannin. Kuchio's no Jutsu. Orochimaru slammed his palms on the ground. A giant purple snake much bigger than all the ones he summoned before appeared coiled around him. The molten bullets slammed into the giant snake, which let out a loud hiss in irritation. Sarutobi, that's Manda, the Lord of Snakes. An eye appeared on the staff that used to be Enma as it warned the Hokage. The old man only nodded. I know. Orochimaru is beginning to get serious. Damn you, Orochimaru. The snake continued to hiss as it talked. The price for this will be high. Orochimaru cackled as the snake uncoiled from around him. I've already paid the ultimate price, I'm afraid. The giant snake looked at him curiously before it turned its gaze at Sarutobi. It's been a long time since I've had monkey, sounds delicious. The snake lurched at Sarutobi, who immediately jumped high into the air. Enma, extend, he shouted as his staff grew to incredible lengths. He swung it in a long arc and before the snake could react he smashed it in the head. You've dropped your guard, sensei. Orochimaru appeared above the old man and swung his sword down. Sarutobi flipped so that he was upside down and caught the sword with both of his sandals. Think again, my foolish student. Hiruzen spun around, snapping Orochimaru's wrist and breaking the sword free from his grasp. By then the staff had retracted and he was already bringing it back forward when he noticed Manda was already coming at them again. The only thing he had time to do was throw Enma towards the ground as the snake ate both Orochimaru and him. Sarutobi, Enma shouted as he transformed back into a monkey. Hokage-sama. Kurenai shouted in horror as she watched what had just happened. He'll be alright. Asuma dropped the last snake of the group they were fighting. How can you be so calm after watching your own father getting eaten? Kurenai turned and yelled at him. Getting upset won't help matters. The best way to help my old man is to take care of that snake. Asuma slowly approached Manda as he talked. The snake smiled hungrily at the two Jonin. Not a moment later though, and Enma's fist slammed into the bottom of the snake's jaw. Get ready to experience pain. The monkey growled. Enma, I'm going to enjoy eating you yet. The snake immediately snapped down at the monkey. The snake smashed pointlessly into the ground. What? It looked around in surprise to see his whole world was dark. Genjutsu. You guessed it. Asuma swung his chakra knives at the giant snake. To his surprise they failed to pierce his skin. The snake chuckled as it turned its head towards them. My scales are harder than diamond. It'll take more than your puny blades to cut me. The snake lurched at the two of them with speed much too fast for its size. It's using its other senses to find us. Kurenai shouted as she and Asuma just barely dodged the strike of the snake's head. Then do something about them. Asuma yelled back. He and Enma jumped at the snake at the same time. Remember not to hurt him badly enough to dispel him or Sarutobi will be teleported with him. Enma shouted. TCH, troublesome. Shikamaru's favorite phrase summed up the situation perfectly. Orochimaru, you fool. Sarutobi shouted as he delivered 3 swift punches at his student. Orochimaru blocked the strikes with his forearms. What's the matter, sensei? Orochimaru grinned wickedly as he and his sensei continued to exchange swift taijutsu strikes. You don't like being inside the belly of a snake. Sarutobi jumped and delivered a powerful kick that knocked the Sannin back into the sticky, pink wall that was part of the giant snake. To his surprise, Orochimaru sunk into the wall. Surprised. This is my battlefield. You can't win here, Sarutobi-sensei. Orochimaru's tongue, wrapped around a kunai, shot from the top right part of the wall. Sarutobi went to move but couldn't as Orochimaru's hands grabbed at his ankles from below. What? He was only able to turn his body slightly and let the kunai pierce his shoulder instead of his heart. Sarutobi grabbed onto the tongue and yanked it hard, pulling Orochimaru's face from the wall. Hello, sensei. Orochimaru spoke despite his tongue being held onto. Sarutobi pulled harder to get face closer but suddenly Orochimaru's legs shot out from the left and right side of the wall. They stretched impossibly long and the bottom of his feet smashed into the side of Sarutobi's head. Damn. Sarutobi let the tongue go which immediately retracted. He then ripped his feet free and stumbled forward and away from all of his students' appendages. When he spun around however, they were all gone. It looked like they had never been there at all. The pain in his shoulder told him though that they had definitely been there however. Cuckoo, what to do, what to do? How will you get out of this mess, sensei? The voice mocked Sarutobi from all around. Before the old man could respond he felt something wet drop onto his shoulder. A hissing sound followed and he turned to see his protective shoulder pad being melted away. Looks like I have to finish this fast. Sarutobi sighed as he slowly inched his way across the bottom of the snake's insides, keeping an eye at the top which continued to drop more of the corrosive liquid. Finish this fast. Oh no, I intend to murder you nice and slow, sensei. Make you suffer for not being brave enough to face me the first time. Orochimaru broke into another fit of laughter. Just as he did, Sarutobi ran through a set of seals. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. He immediately released a giant fireball deeper into the snake's body. No. Orochimaru's upper body suddenly sprung forth from the top, his hands outstretched. They wrapped around his sensei's neck. How dare you scorch this place? The Sannin shrieked. That was your biggest flaw, Orochimaru. You were too cocky. Sarutobi choked out as he grabbed onto his student's arms and yanked at him. Orochimaru was pulled completely from the wall just as the sound of something coming from the direction the fireball went reached their ears. What is that? What did you do? Orochimaru yelled. Sarutobi laughed. You'll see my foolish student. This isn't working. Asuma yelled as the house he had been hiding behind got devoured by the massive snake. Just what kind of half-assed genjutsu are you using? He shouted as he immediately began moving to another hiding space. You try putting the Lord of Snakes under a genjutsu sometime. Kurenai's forehead throbbed as she screamed back at him. It's not as easy as it looks. Enough arguing. Something is happening, Enma said as he gazed curiously at the snake that had quit moving. Its neck suddenly began convulsing as it seemed ready to throw up. What's happening? Kurenai asked in awe. Manda opened his mouth wide and let out a loud burp, blowing Orochimaru and Sarutobi from the snake's mouth. No way, Enma wanted to smack his face. Only Sarutobi would think of making a snake burp to free himself. Asuma sighed and immediately lit up a cigarette. I deny all relations to you. Even Kurenai's sweat dropped. I may have just lost some respect for you, Hokage-sama. Sarutobi however, was in no mode for jokes. Asuma. Attack while its mouth is open. Damn. Asuma threw down his just-lit cigarette. He immediately jumped so he was level with the snake and pointed his chakra blade so it was facing the snake's mouth. Say goodnight. The wind blade shot forward and pierced Manda through the roof of his mouth, shooting it out the top of the giant snake's head. Manda immediately vanished in a cloud of smoke. You bastard! Orochimaru screamed as he landed on the ground. Before he could charge at Asuma, Hiruzen landed in front of him. Not a step closer to my son, he shouted as he buried his fist inside the Sannin's chin, knocking him into a collapsed building. Orochimaru slowly stumbled to his feet. I'm going to rip you apart, he seethed before suddenly pausing. His eyes were on something behind Sarutobi. The Hokage turned around to see a blustered-looking Temari sitting on her butt in front of a pile of rubble. Haku, Dosu, and finally Zabuza landed next to her. The swordsman gazed at Sarutobi in a way of apology. We're not interrupting, are we? He asked as blandly as he could. What is this? Orochimaru asked as he got to his feet. Not only is a kunoichi from Sunagakure here, but so is my own henchman. Former henchman. Dosu suddenly shouted. You would have left me for dead just like Kabuto did. Orochimaru's face twisted into a cruel snare. I saved your life. It was mine to do with as I pleased. His mouth opened and a dozen kunai fired from it, right at the group. Zabuza stepped in between them and the kunai and swung his sword. We'll get going, Hokage-sama, Zabuza said as he formed a seal. A thick mist blew into the area. Sarutobi nodded. Good. Leave this to us. He turned back to his student. Smooth move, shorty. Just provoke him some more. Temari whispered at Dosu as they quickly moved through the mist. Going through the village had been slow for the group as they had to sneak around in order to avoid fighting all of the Zakus. When they had all begun moving to the first gate, they immediately went to the fourth in hopes of finding no more enemies. Instead they stumbled upon the Hokage's battle of all the ones to stumble into. I'm not the one that slipped and fell down the rubble when I saw him. I wouldn't have had to say anything if not for you. Dosu whispered back. This technique only works if you idiots are quiet. Zabuza was beginning to wonder why he had wanted a genin team at all right about now. And just where do you think you're going? Orochimaru asked from right in front of them. Zabuza sighed. You see, he was already swinging his sword forward. Orochimaru's sword met his and a loud clang alerted the others to the presence of them all. Go! Zabuza shouted as he pushed back Orochimaru's blade. You go too. Sarutobi appeared with Enma who was back in staff mode. Shut down Abumi Zaku. Right. All four of them shouted as they finally ran past the gates of the village. I won't let you. Orochimaru shouted as his body began lurching. His feet transformed and heads began sprouting from his shoulders. Meanwhile, his arms seemed to melt into his torso as his body began to grow bigger and bigger. His transformation finished just as the mist cleared. Yamata no Jutsu. The giant eight-headed snake roared as it stared down at Sarutobi. You, foolish student. Sarutobi stared up at the giant snake with pure pity in his eyes. Sarutobi, what are you going to do against that thing? It's huge. Bigger than Manda. Enma shouted as the eye appeared again. I have no choice, Sarutobi said as he placed Enma down. Shiki Fujin. He began to form seals. No, you can't. That jutsu will kill you. Asuma yelled as he landed next to him. That's right. Kurenai also appeared. You're the Hokage. Before they could argue anymore, the snake heads began to strike. There is no choice, Sarutobi shouted as he jumped and ducked around the giant heads that smashed into the ground. What other way is there to defeat an immortal? I have a better suggestion. The snakeheads quit attacking and everyone turned their heads in surprise at the sound of the new voice. There wasn't just one man standing there though. A whole army of shinobi stood behind the man with white and blue robes that had spoke. His short, brown hair blew gently in the wind. Sarutobi opened and closed his mouth. He then opened it back up. Case Cage Dono. Chapter 28, Invasion, Part 3. The Case Cage, the giant eight-headed snake that had once been Orochimaru hissed. What are you doing here in this village? Could you have decided to lend me your aid? The Case Cage scoffed. Don't get the wrong idea, Orochimaru. I am not here to honor our deal. He jumped down from the rubble he was standing on and landed next to Sarutobi. I am repaying a debt to this village. The Hokage's eyes widened. You can't be serious. The giant snake roared. All of the heads suddenly launched forward, prepared to strike down the two cage where they stood. I am very serious. The cage raised his arms and bright gold dust rose from groups of containers that his men had brought with them. It smashed into Orochimaru and sent his gigantic body flying across the block where it smashed down on top of several buildings. Asuma let out a whistle. Incredible. I've only heard stories of the cage's magnetism Kekkei Genkai that allows him to control gold. He could have any woman he wanted with that ability. Kurenai scoffed from right next to him. Everyone. The cage turned towards his subordinates. Leave the gold dust with me. You all go back up the shinobi of Konoha at the giant tree. Wait. Hiruzen shouted before they could move. What do you mean you owe us a debt? Just what is going on here? I mean exactly what I said. We are here to ally ourselves with you in this battle. The cage folded his arms and turned back to the old man. Is there something wrong with that? A debt? You can't mean because of your son's death. The old man whispered darkly as he took a step closer. What if I do? Hiruzen opened his mouth but he felt Asuma's hand on his shoulder. The bearded man smiled at the cage. We appreciate your help. Please carry on with your orders. The cage nodded thankfully and turned around. You heard me. Everyone get going, sir. Many of the Sunagaku shinobi immediately began migrating towards the tree. Hiruzen grimaced. Asuma, Kurenai, go with them and make sure our men know they are on our side. Right. Kurenai and Asuma both hurried after them. Now only the two cage remained. I expected this man to try to attack anyways. My hunch was right. The cage also turned back towards Orochimaru. That is why you really left your daughter here, isn't it? To keep tabs on the village. Hiruzen mused quietly. He refused to look the cage in the face. Are you upset because you discovered our plot to attack the village? The cage asked curiously. You should still be attacking us. Hiruzen yelled as he spun on him. One of my subordinates killed your son. Yet instead of being angry you are grateful. I see. The cage nodded as he turned his gaze away from the old man. As the father of boys yourself, I see how you can find it hard to understand, but you are wrong. I am not helping you because you killed my son. I am helping you because you saved my life. What? Hiruzen asked in surprise. The cage stared at Orochimaru's charging form. You planned to assassinate me before I came to this village, isn't that right, you snake? He shouted. We interrogated a subordinate of yours and he spilled everything. All 8 of the snakeheads laughed loudly. That's right. I was going to kill you so I could get close enough to Sensei to fight him one-on-one. The cage closed his eyes. That's all I needed to hear. Hokage Dono. We will talk about the death of my son after this conflict is resolved. His eyes opened and a surge of killing intent flooded the area. Right now though, I plan to kill the man I find most responsible. The gold sand rose up behind him in a massive wave. You think you can defeat me? I had confidence that I could defeat you while I was mortal. You have no chance while I am immortal. Orochimaru roared as he continued to charge at the two cage. You planned to have extra subordinates and you planned to do it while I was off guard. Besides, I have the one hailed as the professor with me. There isn't a chance we are going to lose. The cage took a couple of steps forward, the golden dust raised menacingly behind him. You should know that just your dust alone won't be enough. I'm immortal. All of the heads shouted as they lunged forward at the two cages. So you keep saying. The cage mumbled darkly. 8 giant streams of gold dust raced past the two cage and smashed into Orochimaru's heads. The snakeheads and streams of sand began twisting and coiling as they continually smashed into one another in an attempt to get the upper hand. Soon the dust began to completely envelope the giant 8-headed snake. In a matter of moments it was coated completely in gold. All right, Professor, time to show me what you are capable of. Sarutobi smiled as he cracked his neck. Been a long time since I've been referred to as that. I guess as far as being a cage goes I'm your senpai, so I'll be sure not to let you down. You two are taking me too lightly. Orochimaru yelled in anger. Don't be so cocky. You're the cocky one. Sarutobi shouted as he finished forming a set of seals. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. He exhaled a fireball so big it easily enveloped the whole snake. The heat radiated so violently that both cage squinted slightly and stepped back. Orochimaru's screams of pain erupted from inside of the giant blaze. Finally, the flames began to die down and the golden dust that had once coated the snake was now molten gold. Damn you! Damn you! Orochimaru hollered as he continued to thrash about, splashing the gold everywhere. Time to cool him down. As the cage I happen to know a couple wind techniques. The young Kage ran through several seals. Futon. Kamikaze no Jutsu. He exhaled a powerful gust of wind that immediately cooled down the gold enough so that Orochimaru's thrashing became stiff. In just a matter of moments he was no longer able to move at all. Did that get him? Enma asked, his eye sticking out of the staff. Not likely. If my foolish student had one trait I could brag about, it would be his tenacity. Sarutobi said as he lifted Enma and began to cautiously approach the statue-like snake. The cage took a couple steps forward as well. A moment later and they felt the ground beneath their feet shift. Sarutobi whirled around just in time to see Orochimaru's normal body break free from the ground behind the cage, his sword in his hand. Cage dono. Sarutobi shouted just as Orochimaru swung his sword down. How desperate. A stream of gold dust shot from the pouch on the cage's hip and easily halted the sword's movement. What? Orochimaru was so surprised he wasn't able to counter Enma as he extended into his face, knocking him backwards and sending him rolling. Damn you. The Sannin mumbled as he got to his feet. You brought this on yourself. The cage took a couple steps forward, the small stream of dust that had defended him morphed itself into a golden katana. Wait. Orochimaru shouted as he held his hand in front of himself. Are you sure you are making the right choice? What about your village? This is your chance, we can still topple Konoha together. Speak again and I'll chop your tongue out. The cage said darkly. These people killed your son. A moment later and Orochimaru let out a scream of pain as the cage kept his word and sliced his tongue out. Orochimaru turned around to run but Sarutobi was there. His tongue formed back as he gazed with pure contempt at the old man. You think you've won, don't you, Sarutobi-sensei? Well, I've got news for you. This battle is far from won. This village will still fall. That's enough, Orochimaru. Sarutobi sighed. You've done enough. You are going to have a long eternity to think how you've fallen so low. Orochimaru began cackling madly. Both Kage shared a concerned glance before they looked back at the laughing man. Do you know the way Kabuto made this body move? Orochimaru waited only a second before he began to answer his own question. He imprinted a seal inside of my body with a special set of commands. Do you know what the command is when I find myself in this type of a situation? Sarutobi already didn't like where this was going. You can't mean an explosion using my very soul as its ignition. It will likely take half of the village with it. That bastard Kabuto would take away my finally attained immortality with a command like this. A bright purple light began shining through the Sannin's pale skin. Orochimaru. Sarutobi shouted as he took a step forward. There is no time for that. The cage shouted as he appeared next to Sarutobi, grabbed onto him and immediately warped them both back a large distance. What are you doing? We can't let that go off. Sarutobi yelled. The wind was suddenly knocked out of him as the cage buried his fist in his stomach. The Sandaime dropped to his knees and sent spit flying to the ground. I won't let this village be destroyed. The cage said with resolve as he turned back to Orochimaru, who was swirling with purple energy now. He raised his arms and the golden dust began swirling towards Orochimaru. Say goodbye to your precious village, Sarutobi-sensei. Orochimaru was still laughing loudly as the light all closed on the center of his chest and then began expanding rapidly. The golden dust compacted into a ball and began to close in, blocking out the purple light. The cage began to sweat as the ball of dust was being pushed at by the explosion. I won't let you. He dropped to his knees and clenched his hands. The dust suddenly compacted completely as it sealed off the explosion. Silence. Complete silence settled over the small area. Did you stop it? Sarutobi finally asked. The cage was panting heavily as he stumbled up to his feet. Of course. Nothing could possibly penetrate through my shield of gold. Whether that be from the inside or outside. It is the ultimate absolute defense. Incredible. Sarutobi gazed at glittering dust as it all began to flow towards them. Do you think he is really gone? Hiruzen nodded his head. He said it himself, he blew up his very soul for that explosion. He's not coming back. The cage nodded as he folded his arms. Then it would appear our job over here is finished. We must back our men up at the tree. Sarutobi nodded. I owe you my thanks in coming to save my village. I also would like to apologize. I was rude to you earlier. Sarutobi bowed low to the young Kage in front of him. Save that kind of stuff for after we survive this battle. The Kage said as he began to move forward slowly. There will be plenty of time for diplomacy then. Hiruzen readjusted his helmet. Yes. For now we have to continue to defend this village. They both said the next words together. We'll show them not to mess with a Kage. The rookies took cover behind a large pile of rubble just in front of the base of the massive tree. That thing is huge, Sakura whispered in awe at it. I think it's even taller than the Hokage monument. We're not here to sightsee. Kiba chided his teammate quietly as he stared intently at all the battles erupting around the tree. He couldn't even believe it himself. Explosions, elemental jutsu, and thrown projectiles were constantly within sight. Hundreds upon hundreds of shinobi were fighting from underneath the roots of the tree to way high on the trunk and even in the branches that were at least 100 stories in the air. We might be in over our heads. Shikamaru noted with a dry mouth as he too watched all the battles. He however was more intent on all the Zakus that were buzzing around the roots, attempting to set fire to the base of the tree. While it seemed like they had done a good job in killing a couple dozen of them, there was easily 1,000 more. That kid may not be powerful, but he definitely makes up for it with quantity. Who knows how many people he's killed simply by self-destructing. As he said that, he watched as a couple Jonin were caught in the blast of a Zaku that had just exploded. Why aren't these green orbs protecting shinobi? Ino asked as she lightly snatched at an orb. It somehow seemed to sense it and evaded her hand. It is only working on civilians. Shino adjusted his glasses. The jutsu likely doesn't have the strength to protect so many people. We should be thankful it is doing as much as it is. Wait a second, a huge group of people is approaching. Kiba rose his nose into the air and sniffed loudly. That smell. It couldn't be. What is it? Sakura asked. They're definitely from Sunagaku. Just as Kiba finished speaking, dozens of men and women garbed in light brown Chunin vest arrived on the scene and launched attacks at Zakus and Otogaku shinobi alike. They're helping us? Choji asked in surprise. Why? I got a feeling I know. Sakura said as she smiled happily at the reinforcements. She watched as all the Konoha shinobi turned slightly in surprise at the arrival of their new comrades, but they quickly renewed their attack with newfound vigor. Ino suddenly shrieked loudly, causing everyone to jump and look at her. To their surprise, she wasn't under attack. Instead, she was pointed up at the giant tree. That's the Nadaime. She shouted. Impossible. Shikamaru turned his gaze to where she was pointing anyways. His eyes nearly bugged from his sockets when he saw Ino was right. Something is amiss. Is that not Hitaki Kakashi engaged in combat with him? Shino suddenly voiced up. You're right. Choji watched as the two men punched and kicked at one another. Just what is going on? Before anyone could ask any more, they watched the tournament referee, Hayate, run forward and slice the Nadaime's head off with his blade. To everyone's continued surprise, it grew back on. We're definitely in over our heads. We need to retreat. Shikamaru turned back around but stopped dead in his tracks. Everyone move, he shouted a second later. All the genin spun around and saw a hailstorm of kunai coming at them. Oh crap. They all immediately jumped skywards and landed on top of the pile of rubble they had been hiding behind. The kunai struck the pieces of concrete and bounced lightly off, but the flickering of tags on the back caught Shino's eyes. Not good, he mumbled as the explosions went off. None of them were caught in the blasts, but the rubble they were standing on collapsed and they all tumbled unceremoniously towards the ground. Kiba barely managed to land on his feet and he immediately noticed Akamaru laying on the ground, morphed back into a dog. Are you all alright? He shouted as he ran up to him. Shino. Sakura screamed worriedly. The bug user was writhing in pain, holding onto the spot where his arm had been severed. Someone help him. He's in great pain. Sakura looked around frantically. What she saw first only made her more frantic. Choji was leaning an unconscious Ino and Shikamaru up against smaller mounds of rubble. Kiba scooped Akamaru up, but before he could run at them he saw 4 figures land in the spot close to where they had just been standing. He didn't like what he saw. 4 Otogaku Jonin stood in front of him and they were likely the ones who had thrown the kunai. Ah, man. One of them sighed loudly. It's just a group of kids. I was hoping to slaughter someone stronger than that. He flipped a kunai in the air as he talked and caught it. Who cares who it is? Let's slaughter them and move on. The other said as he began to form seals. Stop right there. Kiba shouted as he slipped Akamaru into the hood of his jacket and then pulled out 2 kunai. The men chuckled at him. You think you can take us, kid? Suddenly, a giant purple beam came flying from the side that eradicated 3 of the Otogakure shinobi. Kiba and the remaining Otogakure shinobi widened their eyes in surprise. Yes, I killed them, screamed a dark-skinned man with orange hair. Jugo. Or your allies, damn it. The remaining man shouted. Kill. The monstrous youth called Jugo screamed as his one arm formed into a giant axe. He swung it forward and hacked the shinobi unfortunate enough to be in front of him apart. I killed him too. I did it. Jugo screamed happily. What a psycho. Kiba couldn't believe what he had just witnessed in front of his very eyes. He recognized the man as one who obviously bared one of Orochimaru's curse marks. He had seen at least another 50 of them running around and fighting at the base of the tree just moments ago. It was their bad luck that an especially unstable one seemed to have found them. Are you next? Jugo tilted his head to a right angle as he grinned greedily at Kiba now. Are you the next one I get to kill? He immediately began to sprint towards the young genin, his axe-shaped arm held high above his head. This is not looking good. Kiba slid 1 foot backwards and raised both kunai in front of himself. Then something running out from the side caught his eye. No you don't. Choji held up a massive arm that looked like it had been inflated. He swung it forward and it smashed into Jugo's face with such force that any ordinary person would have been blasted off their feet. Jugo, however, didn't even seem fazed. Instead he slowly turned his grinning face towards Choji now. The heavy-set genin took a step back in fear. Is it you who wants to be killed next? Jugo roared as he swung his axe arm forward. His movements stopped in their tracks. His axe arm retracted and he raised his 2 normal hands to his head and started screaming. Kiba spun his gaze to Sakura who was holding her hands in a seal. I put him in a genjutsu that makes him think he's on fire. She explained as she got to her feet. We need to use this chance to get the others out of here. Kiba nodded and ran over to grab Ino but Jugo's screams suddenly intensified, stopping them all as they watched him freak out. It hurts. It hurts. Jugo screamed as his body seemed to be reconstructing itself. He seemingly doubled in size as giant pads of armor made of his skin wrapped around him. His enhanced size seemed to increase his weight too, as his feet sunk slightly into the ground, cracking the earth and splitting the concrete he stood on. What the heck is going on? Sakura felt her knees go weak from the amount of killing intent being leaked from the boy's body. His chakra flow changed completely. That means he broke the genjutsu, huh? Kiba had a bad feeling about this. Yeah, it does. Sakura nodded dumbly. Was it you? Was it you that caused me pain? Jugo screamed as he began charging at Kiba like a stampeding gorilla. I'll kill you for it. I'll rip you apart. Damn it. Kiba whipped both kunai at him. To his utter horror, they bounced off of Jugo's enhanced armor like it had only been a small rock. This is really not looking good. Before he could react further, a ball at the end of a long chain swung around and immediately bound Jugo's huge body. The giant man collapsed to the ground in a loud thud that sent pieces of concrete flying everywhere. Next, a series of fireballs came flying around and began pelting the massive body of the big man, exploding and covering him in smoke at the same time. Sakura turned to the people who had saved them. Her eyes widened in surprise when she realized who it was. Sasuke-kun. Tenten-san. The 2 of them landed down next to Kiba who quickly saw they looked a little worse for wear themselves. You 2 sure you should be out here after just fighting in the tournament? Tenten scoffed. Just cause we lost doesn't mean you should underestimate us. Right, Sasuke. The Uchiha nodded. We'll show that we deserve to get as far as we got while you get the others to a safe place. We can't let you guys fight this monster by yourselves. Sakura yelled. We'll be fine, you need to get your teammates to safety. Worry about us later. Sasuke turned and looked at her as he reassured her. This battle is bound to have attracted more enemies. The only reason they haven't shown up is because everyone is clearly afraid of this guy. If you bring him down before getting everyone to safety, you are only putting their lives in greater danger. Kiba scoffed. Why is it always us that is being saved? He grumbled as he picked Ino up. Meanwhile, Sakura hefted Shino to his feet and Choji had Shikamaru already. If you got it then hurry up. Tenten said as the smoke around Jugo finally cleared. That guy shrunk down to normal and broke free from my chains. Sorry for being a burden. Shino mumbled quietly as he cringed. The spot where he had lost his arm was burning with pain. Don't worry about it, Sakura said soothingly. You're still not up to top form is all. Once you can return the favor. She immediately began running towards the roots as there were plenty of spaces to hide in there. Kiba and Choji were right behind her. Do you guys hear something giant moving? Sakura asked before they got more than even a single block. Sakura slowed up a stop and the others did too. They all then jumped on top of another pile of rubble to get a better vantage point. What they saw completely threw them all off guard. A wave of golden dust was flowing towards the tree at incredible speeds. That wasn't what got them the most though. On top of the gold wave rode not just their Hokage but the apparent cage as well. This invasion just keeps getting more and more bizarre. Choji really wished he had something to munch on. The others could only nod in agreement to his statement. Sasuke and Tenten had no time to be paying attention to such things, however. Jugo was charging right at them, and this time his whole body was covered with giant spikes. You think we're going to be okay? This guy did kill a group of Jonin just now. Tenten placed her hand on a scroll on her hip. A scythe popped out of it and she spun it around expertly. Sasuke smirked as he formed a set of seals. Those guys were a group of nobodies. We got this. When he finished speaking he inhaled deeply. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. He shot a giant fireball straight in front of himself. I'll just kill that too. Jugo laughed manically as he charged straight into the fireball, obliterating it completely. To his surprise though, in the brief second the fire had blocked his V-zone, Sasuke and Tenten had both vanished. Looking for me. Jugo spun around to see Sasuke standing on top of a still-standing lamppost. He pulled at a group of barely visible wires and Jugo felt his limbs become bounded once again. Now take this. Tenten screamed as she appeared over his head, swinging down the side in her hand. Jugo, instead of looking afraid, smiled for a brief moment. He then opened his mouth wide and as the scythe reached his face he bit down, shattering the metal with his teeth. Damn, never seen that before. Tenten landed in a crouch in front of the towering youth. She immediately held a small sword in her hand. Kaden. Ruka no Jutsu. Sasuke set the strings that bound Jugo on fire and the fire quickly raced down towards the still bounded monster. No more fire. Jugo screamed as all the spikes on his body sunk back in. They immediately sprouted back out in different spots, snapping Sasuke's wires apart and breaking Tenten's blade that she had just swung forward. Now die. Jugo's whole arm had transformed into a giant spike and he swung it down at Tenten. That's really getting old. Tenten mumbled as she flipped backwards and over the spike that smashed pointlessly into the ground. She threw a group of shuriken before her feet even touched the ground. Unsurprisingly, the shuriken bounced off uselessly. Killing never gets old. Jugo pulled his arm out of the ground but the sound of chirping birds stopped him from charging forward. Chidori. Sasuke roared as he fell towards his opponent, his lightning-enhanced hand outstretched towards him. Jugo grinned as he turned at Sasuke and swung his spiked arm forward. Their piercing attacks connected and Sasuke's shattered through Jugo's completely. Sasuke continued on into Jugo's arm until he flew past the shoulder, successfully destroying his arm entirely. Gah! Jugo reached around and grabbed onto his shoulder, holding onto it with all his might. The rest of his spikes disappeared as he fell to his knees. It hurts. He whimpered. Not as bad as this will. Tenten spun around and hurled a massive, spiked ball. The ball smashed Jugo right in the chest, bowling the big boy over. The ball bounced backwards slightly and Sasuke's eye caught a glimpse of the exploding tags covering it. The explosions went off a moment later. Sasuke appeared next to Tenten unharmed but glaring angrily. Wait for me to get clear before you do something like that. I could have died. You wouldn't have died. Tenten patted him on the shoulder with a huge grin plastered on her face. We've gotten to know each other too well to make a rookie mistake like that. You're nuts. Sasuke shook his head indignantly as he turned back to the clearing smoke. Jugo lay there with his whole chest blown open, revealing his ribs and some of his organs. A truly disgusting sight, thought the surviving Uchiha. Jugo's remaining arm was stretched far to the side and it was just then that he noticed a strange needle was sticking out of it. He followed the needle to see that it connected to the Otogakur Jonin that Jugo had cut down earlier. Lumps of something were coming back through the needle towards Jugo and the man seemed to be shrinking. Oh crap. Sasuke realized too late what was going on as he charged forward. What is it? Tenten, who hadn't been paying attention now saw what Sasuke had just seen. Damn. She too ran after him. Jugo's chest repaired itself and he stumbled up to feet, retracting the needle. You can't kill me, it is I who will kill you. He screamed at the charging Sasuke. It was then that his other arm completely grew back all at once. What? Sasuke stopped hard as Jugo's arm grew until it was triple in size. He then swung it forward in a large arc. Sasuke. Tenten screamed as she watched Jugo swat her teammate to the side like an insect. I killed him. Jugo screamed loudly into the air as he raised his arms triumphantly. Think again. Sasuke's hands shot from the ground underneath Jugo's feet. Before the bigger boy could react, he was sucked into the ground and Sasuke was flying overhead. Tenten, now. Nice work. Tenten glanced ever so briefly at what once would have been Sasuke and saw a log was there instead. She then pulled a windmill shuriken from her scroll and threw it at Jugo's head that still stuck out of the ground. You should have been killed. Jugo showed no interest in the shuriken flying at his head. Instead he glared angrily at Sasuke who again landed on top of the lamppost. The ground ruptured as two wings split off of his back and he took flight into the air, completely dodging the shuriken that continued straight on. This guy can fly too. Sasuke was starting to get really annoyed. First he could morph his body at will, but now he could regenerate damage and fly. That was too much. It didn't help that he kept saying the word, kill, which was possibly more annoying than everything else together. The sight of Tenten's shuriken changing course caught his eyes now. It flew straight up until it was well over their heads and then began to angle its way back down. It was on a collision course with Jugo who had again transformed his right arm into a giant axe. Sasuke was even more impressed when he saw the shuriken break off into two, each one slicing off one of Jugo's wings. Not bad, Tenten. He nodded down towards his teammate. Are you the one interrupting my kill? Jugo screamed as he landed on the ground on his feet. He didn't seem at all hurt by the fact that his wings had been cut off, but he was definitely peeved. Enough with the freaking word already. Tenten held the side of her head in irritation. She then pointed dramatically at Jugo. You're turning into one of those main characters that overuses his catchphrase. Don't you know that is the best way to get people to hate you? Jugo stared at her with an expression that could have been an odd mix of anger, confusion, and constipation. Sasuke just shook his head. He felt stupid for having been impressed with her at all. I'm not sure what you mean. Jugo's body began morphing again and he again looked like he had a group of smokestacks sticking out of him. So I'll just kill you instead. Instead of a beam, a miniature barrage of purple chakra missiles shot from the smokestacks and flew straight at Tenten. That right there is what I'm talking about. Tenten continued to point at him, braving the missiles to scold her opponent. Come on. Sasuke appeared behind her with a tired face. You can argue about stupid things with your friends later. He wrapped his arm around her waist and immediately warped them both to a safer location. That guy is not my friend. Tenten screamed before she felt Sasuke cover her mouth with his hand. Where did you go? Come back. Tenten realized that Sasuke had jumped the two of them behind a small stack of rubble. Her yelling had almost given them away. We need to come up with a better strategy to beat this guy. Sasuke whispered as he peeked over the rubble. No matter what we do, he just regenerates or changes forms. To match whatever we use. We got him that one time. We just weren't thorough enough. Tenten rolled over onto her stomach and also peeked over the rubble. Jugo walked up to a random building and fired his purple chakra missiles into it, completely destroying the establishment. Were you in there? Did that kill you? Tenten shivered in irritation at the use of that word again. Maybe you're right. He can definitely regenerate his skin, but what about his heart? If we can open him up like before and attack it, I wonder if it would put him down for good. Sasuke mused quietly as he rubbed his chin. If I open him back up, do you think you could use the Chidori to do the job? Tenten wasn't sure if it was much, but any plan was better than none and they needed one fast. The things Jugo was blowing up was getting closer and closer to their hiding place. Sasuke grimaced at the suggestion. It depends. I've already used it twice today, which is still my limit. However, if those medics healed me enough after my battle with Naruto, I may be able to squeeze one out. What would you give for odds? Tenten asked hopefully. The pile of rubble next to them exploded in a blast of purple smoke. 50-50. Sasuke said after a moment of thought. Jugo turned his huge body to the pile of rubble they were behind. That's going to have to work. We're out of time. Our lives are riding on this gamble. Jugo fired off another set of missiles at them. You hide until I open him up. Then charge in, no hesitation. Tenten yelled as she jumped straight into the air. As she flipped around, she watched Sasuke vanish to another location just before the place they had been hiding got blasted apart. I found you. Jugo yelled as he turned towards the sky where Tenten was. He fired off yet another barrage of missiles. You sure did. Tenten hurled a group of kunai that met with the missiles, causing them to explode in midair. Watching that gave the weapon expert an idea. She smiled mischievously as she fell towards the ground. She pulled what could be mistaken as a cannonball attached to a short chain just before she hit the ground. She then heaved it up with great effort. I forgot how heavy this damn thing was. No wonder I hate using it. So you've decided that you are the one is going to be killed. Jugo began firing the missiles off non-stop. He almost looked like a machine gun with the way he kept firing off more and more. Tenten quickly started running in a zigzag pattern towards giant killing machine, a vein in her head throbbing. I thought I told you to quit it with that. She roared as she dodged explosions on all sides as she got closer and closer. Jugo was laughing maniacally. What are you going to do? You can't possibly stop me from saying the truth. Just watch me. Tenten halted in her tracks and spun in a circle, swinging the metal ball from the end of its chain. With a loud yell of exertion, she completed her spin and whipped the ball with all her might at Jugo. The boy only laughed as it flew at him, his cannons still firing constantly. As if that could even scratch me. Oh, it will, Tenten smirked as explosions erupted all around her. Huh. Jugo was completely taken aback as the ball didn't exactly hit him but slid snuggly inside one of the smokestacks he was firing from. Oh, shish, he never got to finish that as the pressure of a missile trying to be released from that smokestack caused it to explode, literally blowing up in Jugo's face. He tumbled backwards as his flesh was blown apart, opening way to his organs once again. Sasuke, now's your chance. Tenten yelled just as the last missile Jugo had managed to fire landed right in front of her feet. She was blasted backwards and sent rolling onto the ground. Ah, she moaned as she opened one eye just halfway. To her relief, Sasuke was already charging at Jugo, who had fallen to his knees. To her fear, however, he did not have a Chidori in hand. Instead, he ran at the man with a kunai. Jugo stared at him with a look of pure rage. That little toy won't be enough to stop me. It's going to have to be. Sasuke shouted as he swung it forward, right at Jugo's exposed heart. He wasn't able to react in time, however, when Jugo's arm shot forward and caught it. What? Sasuke couldn't believe he had the strength left to do something like that with a hole that big in him. Now give me your body so I can heal my own. Jugo raised his other hand and slammed it down on top of Sasuke's head. The Uchiha was smashed painfully into the ground at Jugo's knees. He turned his gaze upwards slightly to see the needle Jugo had used earlier begin to come out of his open palm. Tenten, Sasuke mumbled in a barely audible voice. I'm sorry. I couldn't use another Chidori after all. I didn't have the strength. The needle was coming closer and closer to his flesh. This fight is over when I say it's over, Sasuke. The Uchiha's eyes snapped completely open. Those had been Naruto's last words when he had won that fight. Where had he found that strength from? The resolve to push himself just another move further. Sasuke wanted to laugh. In his final moments he thought about Naruto. Sasuke, don't give up. Believe in yourself. Tenten screamed as she stumbled forward but collapsed again. Believe in myself? Sasuke asked. The needle was inches away. Was that what it had been all along? Just the ability to believe and the strength to not give up. Sasuke had no idea, but he felt something welling up in the bottom of his stomach. Something powerful. His hand shot up and grabbed onto the needle just before it pierced him. What are you doing? Jugo sounded almost mocking as he stared down at his beaten opponent. I'm stopping you. Sasuke's hand began shaking violently as he pushed Jugo's needle up. Slowly but surely he managed to do so. Soon he put his other hand on the ground as he helped himself to his knees and pushed Jugo back farther. You can't possibly do this. Jugo couldn't believe he was being overpowered by this little whelp. This fight is already over. Sasuke finally rose to his feet and threw Jugo's arm to the side. He then formed 3 seals and held his hand up. A blue blade of electricity formed and he slowly brought it back into striking position. This fight is over when I say it's over. He shouted as he took the last step forward and swung his attack around. Chidori. No. You can't kill me. Jugo raised both arms over his heart but Sasuke pierced through them easily. His attack carried on flawlessly and struck Jugo right in the heart. The light slowly dimmed from the giant boy's eyes as Sasuke pulled his hand backwards. It was stained heavily with blood. With a loud thud, Jugo collapsed to the floor at Sasuke's feet. Sasuke. Tenten finally reached the Uchiha but tumbled. She fell into Sasuke and had to lean against him for support. You asshole. She screamed as she recovered and then slapped him in the face. What the hell was that for? Sasuke asked as he took a step back and raised his hand to his face. For scaring me. I thought he was about to kill you. You should have just stuck with the plan from the beginning. Tenten stared at Sasuke with blazing eyes. Sasuke scoffed and averted his eyes. It was a stupid plan. I thought my way would have worked better. Bull, I saw you whisper your apology. Tenten placed her hands on her hips as she continued to glare at him. If you heard that then you know why I didn't keep to the plan. Sasuke turned back to her as he yelled. Tenten opened her mouth to respond but the sound of something flying overhead caused her to stop and look up. Sasuke followed her gaze. Flying straight down at them were 3 more Zakus. Damn, Sasuke mumbled as he and Tenten immediately began to limp away, using each other as support. Where do you think you're going, Uchiha? I owe you one for what happened in the forest. All 3 Zakus yelled at the same time. One of them opened his mouth, the metal wire shot out from it and wrapped around the 2 of them. Take this, he shouted as it spun the around in a wide arc before slamming them into a wall. Now have fun in hell. All 3 Zaku opened their chests up, prepared to fire more kunai. Not so fast. A gray spinning drill smashed into one of the Zaku, freeing Sasuke and Tenten in the process. The other 2 turned around and prepared to shoot the kunai but one got hit with a kunai that exploded a moment later and Choji appeared and smashed the other with his giant fist. You guys okay? Sakura asked as she landed next to them and pulled them free from the metal cord. Thanks to you guys. Tenten nodded thankfully at Sakura who was pulling her to her feet. We said we would be back. Kiba landed on all 4s on the ground. Choji meanwhile inspected Jugo's dead body. I'm really surprised you guys got him. He was such a monster. One look from him and I was frozen. Trust us, it wasn't easy. Sasuke mumbled as he finally got to his own feet. So what's the plan from here? We thought you guys had a plan. Kabuto grinned maliciously as Lee charged at him in his usual taijutsu stance with one arm forward and the other held behind his back. What a hasty guy, you didn't even let me announce the winner. Where is the fun in that? There is no more time for your fun. Lee shouted as he jumped high into the air. He seemed to hang suspended for just a moment before his body burst into action and he spun around, delivering his signature spinning kick. Konoha Senpu. Kabuto sighed in what sounded like pity as he raised his hand into the air. Without any effort whatsoever he caught Lee right by his orange legwarmer. Allow me to show you the difference between a Jonin and a Genin. He was already swinging Lee down as he spoke. Lee was smashed with great force into the water in front of Kabuto's feet. The white-haired man crouched down and stared at Lee's face that was just barely above the water. You see, it's not a matter of fate, hard work, or believing in yourself this time. It's simply the difference in strength between you and me. Kabuto had yet to let go of Lee's leg and he suddenly jerked up on it, pulling Lee into the air. Now be a good boy and let me finish up with my business. He threw Lee halfway across the stadium with the barest of movement from his arm. Lee slammed into the water with a loud smash and Kabuto turned back towards Naruto with a satisfied smirk on his face. Now then, where were we? He asked as he walked up to Naruto, scalpel in hand. We were at the part where we kicked your ass and saved the village from otherwise certain doom. Naruto flashed Kabuto a foxy smile as he laced his voice with heavy sarcasm. Ah, yes. Kabuto hit his open palm with the bottom of the kunai. I remember that now. A moment later and the sound of something piercing flesh reached Naruto's ears. He looked down in surprise to see that Kabuto had stabbed into him right on the edge of his seal, just barely missing it. When Kabuto next spoke, his voice was dark and terrifying. "You think the situation you're in is something you can laugh off?" he asked as Naruto attempted to keep his face straight through the pain. "Well." He twisted the scalpel and Naruto let out a small moan. "I didn't think so." The moan seemed to satisfy Kabuto as he pulled the scalpel out of Naruto's stomach. "You are about to have the Kyuubi extracted from your body. A process that will also rip the very life out of you. You should think your last minutes out a little more carefully, don't you think? Could it be that you, Kabuto, are afraid of your own death?" Naruto gave Kabuto an incredibly pained smile until the back of Kabuto's hand smashed into his cheek. Naruto spit blood and some began to dribble down the side of his chin as well. "I do not fear death." Kabuto seethed darkly. "I view it as the next step in my journey towards learning the mystery behind this world. Maybe instead of worrying about why it's here you should be worrying about what you can do to make life better here." Naruto flinched slightly as he expected another blow to follow his statement but none came. Instead, Kabuto stared at him evenly. "I am making this world better for myself. Once this village is down, I shall move on to the next one. Then the next. I will conquer them all, gaining in strength and knowledge as I revive each village's heroes and gather the Biju." Kabuto rubbed Naruto's cheek gently as he said these things in an even gentler tone. "I thought this was for science." Naruto did not like the way this guy was touching him one bit and the disgust showed on his face. "Oh, it is," Kabuto assured. "When I rule the whole world I'll be able to study and experiment as I please. Nothing will be taboo anymore and I will have infinite resources. It all starts here, with you, Naruto-kun." Kabuto ripped Naruto's green jacket open by the zipper, revealing his seal for him to see. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Kabuto's anger resurfaced with full force as he spun around to see Lee standing again and staring at him. "You just don't know how to quit." Kabuto sighed as he massaged his forehead. "I guess this is also my fault for not just killing you in the first place." He raised the scalpel up. "Come and die then." Hinata watched intently as Lee did just that and charged forward. She nodded lightly to herself. The time was now. She had been lying motionless so she could gather her chakra and be of help, but the time for that was over. She closed her eyes and focused. She could see over which of her chakra points the ropes of water wrapped around. Exerting chakra from those points, she snapped the ropes apart like they were paper. She was immediately up and running. "Lee Senpai," she shouted. "What?" Kabuto turned an annoyed eye towards her now too. "So you both want to die now, is it? I had expected more from you, little Hinata." "Lee Senpai," Hinata repeated as she ran not towards Kabuto but straight on a collision course towards Lee. "Open the first gate. Let's use that move." "Right," Lee shouted as he unwrapped his bandages. Kabuto didn't like the sound of that. He started to move forward but the two of them were already together. "First gate. Open," Lee shouted as his arm bandages began to wrap around Hinata's body. He snapped them tight and jumped high into the air, taking her with him. As they reached the height of their arc he began spinning rapidly. "Hakusho Kaden, attack mode." They shouted together as Hinata's spinning shield turned into a deadly drill that began flying at Kabuto. The glasses-wearing shinobi realized instantly that there would be no possible way of stopping that for him. So he did the one thing he could do. He spun around and slashed at Naruto. His scalpel just barely grazed him when the drill arrived. It just barely nicked Kabuto, sending him flying to the side from the force of the rotation and tearing into the skin around his ribs. Naruto gave a huge smile as he swung his legs up, letting his teammates successfully smash the bottom of the cross. A moment later and Naruto was sent flying through the air, the cross crumbling apart, allowing Naruto to pull his hands free. The two kunai that had bounded him fell towards the water. He landed right next to Lee and Hinata, who stopped their spin and separated from each other. "Thanks guys, it was really uncomfortable being pinned to that thing." "Naruto-kun," Hinata shouted as she jumped onto him, giving him a big hug and burying her face in his shoulder. Hey, Naruto sighed happily despite the situation. Hinata was the same as always. Suddenly though, he cringed and buckled down to one knee. "Naruto-kun," Hinata asked worriedly. Just a moment later and she was shoved violently backwards by a burst of red chakra that began to leak out of Naruto's body. It grew even more violent and started to swirl at high speeds, pushing even the water back. A fox head made entirely of chakra rose above his head as the chakra gathered wildly in that spot. What is going on? Kabuto chuckled as he got up to his feet. He held his hand over his ribs, healing the skin that had been ripped apart by Lee and Hinata's combination attack. I told you, that cross allowed me to operate on special chakras. Just before you hit me I made sure to operate a little. Hinata, Lee and Naruto all turned their heads down to look at his seal. Hinata and Lee couldn't see clearly from the violent wave of red chakra that was pushing them back. To Naruto though it was as clear as day. In the center of his seal was a small swirl. However, his swirl now had a straight clear line going through it, showing skin where should have otherwise been black. You only swiped it just a little. Naruto turned and yelled at the white-haired man. That was all that was necessary. Kabuto smirked as he readjusted his glasses. With a crack that big in the seal the Kyuubi can easily finish the rest. Then what was with dragging it out like you did? You could have done this forever ago. Naruto began to crumple more under the increased strain he was feeling and he began to sweat from the intense heat inside the zone. The fox head above him was beginning to get much bigger and it had sprouted a neck now too. Kabuto laughed louder. I told you, I like to enjoy myself. This village can't stop me anyways, it doesn't matter how long I delay. You bastard, Naruto attempted to stand up but it felt like his gravity had increased dramatically within the zone of red chakra. Naruto-kun. Hinata startled Naruto by her proximity. He turned to see her just a couple feet away from him, inside the mass of swirling red chakra. Hinata, what are you doing? Get out of here. Naruto screamed at her. Hinata shook her head stubbornly. Not without you. She finally dropped to her knees just in front of him. She clasped her hands around his. I won't ever leave you. Hinata, Naruto couldn't think of anything to say. Instead he settled on a determined stare. I won't let this thing free, Hinata. He's staying right where he belongs and then we're going to kick this guy's ass together. Hinata nodded enthusiastically to his words. Neither of them paid attention to the fact that part of the fox's body was beginning to grow over their heads. You can do it, Naruto-kun. I believe in you. She squeezed his hands harder as they felt themselves continued to be crushed by the increased pressure. If only I knew something about seals, then I could repair it. She mumbled as she stared down at it. Naruto widened his eyes at Hinata's words. That's it, he shouted as he held his right hand up. To his relief it was still openly bleeding. The chakra leaking out of him wasn't going to healing. He mixed the blood on his 3 inside fingers and then looked down at the seal. With 3 precise strokes he covered the missing parts of the seal with his blood. The effect was instantaneous. The fox head made of chakra crumbled away completely and the chakra quit swirling nearly as madly as before. The heat died down and ever so slowly all the chakra began to return to his body. What did you do? Kabuto suddenly bellowed at the top of his lungs. Hinata looked at him incredulously. What did you do? She repeated. Naruto smirked as he stood up. I fixed it of course. A little of my blood to fill in the missing holes and this baby is as good as new. Naruto stumbled just slightly. Okay, I can feel more of the fox's chakra than normal but it is almost as good as new. Impossible, Kabuto grinded his teeth as he stared at the blonde. A temporary fix like that. How could something so incredibly stupid work so well? Hinata smiled up at her boyfriend as she gave him another big hug. Good thinking, Naruto-kun. Naruto chuckled as he scratched his head. You're the one who gave me the idea. I'm just thankful it worked. Kabuto took in a couple deep breaths as he attempted to calm himself down. It's no problem. I'll just do it again. He whispered quietly. Now then, Naruto shouted loudly as Lee ran up to them. Where were we? That line caused Kabuto to cringe in anger. He knew what was coming next. Oh yeah, I remember. We were at the part where we kicked your ass and saved the village from otherwise certain doom. Chapter 29, Invasion, Part 4. Hiyashi gasped for breath as he glared at the one enemy in front of him. The enemy that had once been the person he was closest to in life. He alone faced his wife, Hyuga Kana. With his 360-degree vision he could see the members of the barrier squad behind him frantically working at tearing down the black walls that separated him from his daughter. He was the last defense between them and his undead wife. They had been fighting fairly evenly for a good while now but Hiyashi was finding it hard to take any kind of advantage. She was throwing what seemed like an endless stream of Senbon and he had to constantly keep his rotation active to effectively bat them aside. "You, help him," the commander of the barrier squad yelled to one of his men. "Yes sir." One of the members quit working and charged at Kana with his kunai drawn. "You fool. Don't engage her in taijutsu." Hiyashi yelled too late. Kana slipped into what could have at first been mistaken as a Juken fighting stance. However, the key differences were she only held a single finger extended and her stance was held much more loosely. The barrier shinobi swung at her and she stepped ever so lightly to the side, bringing her finger forward as she did. She struck him just below the elbow and then in the shoulder. What? The man's arm fell limply to his side. Without even pausing, she then struck him with just one finger right in his spine. The man collapsed to the ground, completely immobile. What did she do? The commander couldn't believe his subordinate had been taken down so fast. My wife may be a Hyuga without the eyes, but she learned to turn that into a great advantage. By learning about special pressure points on the human body, she is able to shut you down with just a simple touch. She can accurately hit those points with Senbon needles, so she is not limited to just taijutsu. She is also a master of poisons that paralyze or dull the reflexes. The commander grimaced. That's quite the troublesome opponent. Hiyashi nodded but couldn't help but think about how much an understatement that was. Don't send any more of your men to battle her. I alone shall be her opponent. You got it. The commander of the barrier squad agreed, not willing to lose any more men to the fierce Hyuga woman. Kaden. He completed his rotation, knocking the Senbon needles aside. You won't be getting a step closer to these men. He declared loudly. You can't hold me off forever, Hiyashi. You need to seal me somehow. Kana already had more needles as she said this. How am I supposed to do that? Hiyashi asked as he furrowed his brow in frustration. You should leave that to me, Hyuga-san. Hiyashi didn't bother to turn his head as a single Sunagaku Kunoichi arrived. He had seen her coming a long time ago. The barrier members, however, looked completely surprised. What is Sunagaku doing here? Under orders of Kazekage-sama, we are backing up this village. The Kunoichi said as she landed next to Hiyashi. My name is Maki and I happen to be a capable sealing jutsu specialist. Hiyashi nodded, impressed. I appreciate your help. I'll go in and create an opening for you. I'm sorry, Hiyashi. I won't go down quite that easily. Kana said as she slowly approached her husband and her new opponent. Kana, Hiyashi had to stop himself from reaching up and clutching at the skin around his heart. He swore silently to rip Kabuto apart the very moment he got inside that barrier. Let's end this. He charged right at his wife who slipped into her taijutsu stance. He swung his palm forward and Kana attacked with her fingers extended. For a few moments they battled so eloquently, an onlooker may have thought they were dancing as they dodged and weaved around one another while trying to land a battle-ending strike. Finally, Hiyashi ducked under a strike and extended both hands forward. He caught his wife hard in the gut. She was knocked off her feet and landed on her backside. Kana, I'm sorry, Hiyashi mumbled as he pulled his hands back and then jumped next to Maki. The rest is on you, Maki-san. No problem. Maki pulled out a giant roll of cloth and slung it forward. The clothing just began to wrap around Kana. I truly am sorry, Hiyashi. Kana whispered when just her face was left exposed. The Senbon she had been throwing that lay around Hiyashi's and Maki's feet burst open and small amounts of purple smoke drifted out of them. Damn, paralysis poison, both Hiyashi and Maki dropped to their knees. I should have seen that coming. You always used to store the smoke inside your Senbon. Unable to move, neither of them were able to do anything as Kana freed herself. Damn it, we lost. Maki cursed as she fell to the ground, unconscious. Kana then walked past her husband and approached the barrier squad. Damn it, let's get her men. All the remaining members of the barrier squad quit their work and charged at once. With almost no effort, Kana put them all down with what appeared to be practiced ease. Her taijutsu stance was truly something to be feared. Hiyashi alone remained conscious. The difference is this time where he had already failed to protect the barrier squad and now he could barely move. Kana slowly approached his kneeling form. Hiyashi bit his lip as he cursed inside his head. If our daughter managed to break free from the effects of paralysis, then I should be able to as well. Hiyashi knew he could probably temporarily overcome the effects, but what was the point? Could he beat this immortal? He wondered these things as his eyes scanned them, looking for some kind of weakness. Kana was now right in front of him, and at this close a range, Hiyashi finally saw something. It was small and wasn't much, but it appeared to be a kunai with a small tag with a written code inside of her body. That's it, that's how he makes you move. Everything clicked inside of Hiyashi's head. Hiyashi inclined his head ever so slightly. Kana, I love you. Hiyashi then raised his head to stare at her. Before she could react, Hiyashi's body sprang swiftly into action. His arm struck only once, but that was enough, he realized, as the tag within her body crumbled apart. What? Kana collapsed to her knees, in front of her husband. I attacked the codes commanding your movements. While your soul is still anchored to this word, you can no longer do anything. Hiyashi stated blandly, however he was surprised to see that just a moment later her body began crumbling apart. I don't understand, Hiyashi whispered gently. This shouldn't be happening. Kana smiled sadly at her husband. Just one last time, Hiyashi, she mumbled as her arm slowly began to lift itself up. Impossible, how can you move? Hiyashi couldn't believe it as Kana's hand slowly wrapped around the back of his head. Her purple eyes closed as she leaned her head forward and managed to give Hiyashi one last dying kiss. Love is strangely powerful, Hiyashi, she whispered as she pulled back and tilted her head slightly. Her dark blue hair that was tied up in a bun bounced slightly from the movement. As she completely crumbled away, Hiyashi saw the tears in her eyes. I wish I could have seen our daughters just one more time. The dust that had once been her whispered as her soul left the planet entirely. Hiyashi sat completely still, paralyzed not just by the poison now, but by his own emotions. Tears slowly began to slide down his cheeks. How strange. He couldn't even remember the last time he cried. Finally, his body gave out completely and he fell to the ground on his stomach. His head that rested on the concrete was turned so he could stare at the barrier that trapped Hinata. My daughter, hit that bastard extra hard for me. The wind blew strongly in the Hokage's face, forcing him to squint his eyes slightly as the wave of golden dust he and the cage rode on took them ever closer to the massive tree where almost every shinobi in the entire village battled. Are you ready, old man? The cage spoke with a small hint of amusement in his voice. The Hokage somehow managed to let out a small chuckle in response to the much younger Kage's question. He felt a lot of tension leave his shoulders as he did. Please, this old body has been aching for a battle. I'm not the type of man to let all my subordinates do the work. That ache may be more than waiting for a battle. I'm glad you feel that way, however. We're here. With a flick of his fingers, the giant wave of gold skid to a stop and both Kage jumped off of it and right onto the trunk of the massive tree. Hokage-sama. Many Konoha shinobi shouted in acknowledgement to the presence of their leader. Not a single one of them turned to greet him, however, as they continued to battle against their foes. The Hokage was impressed to note that they were beginning to pull ahead by a wide margin thanks to the efforts of all the Sunagaku shinobi present as well. Surviving the invasion that had started out so bleak was becoming more and more possible. Enma, extend. Sarutobi shouted as he swung his staff forward. Enma shot out in a straight line and impaled the Otogaku shinobi that had been engaged in combat with Nara Shikaku. The clan head took the hint and immediately landed next to his Hokage, his head bowed low. Sir, what is it you request? The cage turned and blasted a group of approaching men away with his gold dust while the older man turned to his subordinate. I want a status report on what is going on here. What is most pressing situation and how many of the undead are left? Sir, to my knowledge only 2 of them are left at the moment. Might Guy is engaged with his sensei, Psycho Hero beneath this great tree, and Hitaki Kakashi is currently engaged with Nadaime-sama on the other side of the trunk. The most pressing concern is the still countless Abumi Zaku who are suicide running the tree and attempting to set it ablaze. The Hokage felt his heart wrench when Shikaku mentioned the Nadaime. The Kasuke appeared oblivious to this as he spoke up. We should definitely deal with a former Hokage before worrying about anyone else. Both our combined strength combined with the copy ninja could surely take him down with little sacrifice. Shikaku inclined his head. He knew what he was about to say was over his bounds, but he also understood what had to be done. Kage-sama is correct. At the moment, Nadaime-sama poses the greatest threat to everything Shodai-sama sacrificed himself for. The old man nodded stiffly. Yes, of course, he said with a dry voice. We shall move to take him down immediately. Shikaku, as you were. Sir. Shikaku got up and rejoined the battle, but not without a quick glance back at his leader. The cage turned back to all the Zakus flying around. Annoying pests, he said in disgust as he moved his hands exaggeratedly. The golden dust lurched upwards and enveloped them before it crushed them. I have a team dispatched to take care of them already. The Hokage said as he began running along the length of the trunk, making way to where the Nadaime was supposed to be fighting. Prudent as always. The cage was after him in a flash. I hope they take care of the job soon. The sight of those things flying around like tiny insects continues to annoy me. The gold dust took the form of a giant stream as it followed after him. There they are. The Hokage shouted after a minute of scanning the tree for his old sensei. To his continued relief, not only was Kakashi fighting, but so were Hayate and Yamato. Mokuden no Jutsu. Yamato shouted as he slammed his hand on the ground. The Nadaime flipped himself backwards and easily dodged the wood from the tree that attempted to swallow him up. Hayate was waiting for him when he landed. He formed a small set of seals. Suiro no Jutsu. To the surprise of the swordsman, he didn't trap him in the water prison but himself. His sword hit the water but his blade stopped like it was made of the strongest earth. The Nadaime formed more seals. Suiryuden no Jutsu. The water orb exploded outwards into 4 separate dragon heads. The first 2 bowled Hayate over, who had been standing point blank. The others flew at Yamato and Kakashi. They each slammed their hands on the ground. A wall of mud and a wall of wood rose up to protect them from the incoming water dragons. You wouldn't think it would be so hard to fight a single man. Kakashi was panting heavily from the constant strain of having to use this Sharingan. He was Hokage for a reason. Yamato, however, appeared to be completely refreshed as he fought. Just noticing this brought a strange feeling of ire to the copy ninja. The sound of water rising from behind them caused them both to turn around. 2 swirling vortexes of water were coming right at them. How did he generate the water from behind us? Nadaime-sama was known for attacking with Sweden from all kinds of directions by combining it with some kind of space-time jutsu. Kakashi explained calmly as they both rolled out of the way of the swirling water that destroyed the barriers they had just created. Kakashi then charged straight at him. Absorb him into the tree while I keep him busy. We've been trying that. Yamato yelled back, exasperated. No matter how clever a strategy they came up with, it just wasn't enough to bring the former leader down. It made Yamato wonder what kind of power had been capable of doing it at all. Just then, the sight of the Hokage and cage caught his eye. Karyuden no Jutsu. The Hokage spit out a group of fireballs that flew at his former sensei from behind. Take this. The cage raised his arm and a stream of gold dust flew past him. The gold dust and fireballs combined together to form giant balls of molten gold. The Nadaime turned his head towards the sinister attack. Meanwhile, Kakashi formed a small set of seals. Raiden. Raiju Hashiri no Jutsu. His hand glowed with electricity as an electric dog jumped from it and charged at the Nadaime from behind. The 2 powerful techniques approached the Nadaime quickly from either side, yet the man calmly looked back and forth between them. The techniques collided into each other and Kakashi spun his head around. Yamato. Now is your chance. I'm on it. The wood user shouted, already forming the last seal. He smirked victoriously, but it slipped away faster than it came. What's wrong? Kakashi didn't like that look. He's not there. Yamato's voice was laced with his own disbelief. What? Kakashi spun back around and saw the smoke clear to reveal a puddle of water where the Nadaime had been. Damn, a water clone. The Hokage wasn't at all surprised by his sensei's quick escape. Instead, he seemed to have been expecting it, as evident when he turned around to face the man that was now standing behind him. It's been a long time, sensei. Saru, I see you are still Hokage. Tobirama had the smallest of smiles on his face as he looked at his student. Forced back into from retirement, I'm afraid. The old man gave a strained grin back as he settled into a fighting stance. I also see you have allied yourself with Sunagaku. I am glad relations are improving. Tobirama also settled into a fighting stance. You are awfully curious for a dead man. The cage mumbled as he raised his hand up and a katana made of gold formed there. Before any of them made another movement, Hayate appeared from right below, his sword swinging upwards. What? The Nadaime had no chance to react as his hands were sliced clean off from his body. Now is your chance. Hayate back-flipped over both Kage as they ran forward, Sarutobi with his staff and the Kage with his golden sword. Stop. That one's a clone too. Kakashi yelled too late as their attack struck it, causing it to explode and ensnare them both in a prison of water. As if something like this could hold me. The Kage stabbed his sword forward and they were both freed instantly. Now where did he really go? Over there. Hayate shouted as he pointed towards the sky about 100 yards deeper into the village from where they were. The Nadaime hung at the arc of his jump, seemingly suspended in the air with his hands in a seal. What's he doing? Yamato had a terrible feeling in the pit of his stomach as he felt the surge of chakra being summoned from Tobarama's body. His bad feeling was right on the spot as one by one, dozens of spinning discs of water began to form. There's no way he thinks those will all hit us, does he? The Kage folded his arms, unimpressed. When the attacks finally fired off, he realized how wrong he had been. The dozens of water vortexes arced downwards and aimed right for the roots of the giant tree. They smashed into them, quickly obliterating them as they went. Everyone could only wait to see what would happen. After just a couple antagonizing seconds, the sound of creaking reached their ears. The tree slowly but ever so surely began to tip towards the village. The green orbs that continued to hang around the village began flickering, as if the falling of the tree was extinguishing them. The Hokage raised his voice to a boom that could be heard by everyone. Shinobi of Konoha, keep this tree standing no matter what. If it falls it will flatten close to half the village. As he said this he immediately moved into action and began to sprint around to the other side. Kage dono. He shouted. I know. The young Kage immediately dropped towards the ground. The second he landed his hands were up in the air. The huge wave of golden dust he and the Hokage had rode in on rose up and immediately began to rise around the tree in support. A dozen Zaku began flying at him, a barrage of kunai shooting from their stomachs. The gold dust formed around him in a dome that protected him from the attacks. Yamato and the Hokage landed down on the other side of the tree just moments after this happened. It wasn't just them. At least another 100 Konoha shinobi and Sunagakure shinobi were there as well. All of them whirled long wires that wrapped around the tree and they began heaving with all their might in an attempt to stop it from falling. Enma, extend. Sarutobi shouted as Enma shot forward and then bent and wrapped himself around the giant tree as well. Mokuden no Jutsu. Yamato slammed his palms into the ground and more roots sprouted forth from it and connected themselves to the tree in an attempt to keep it from leaning any farther. A giant Choza rammed into the tree from the other side and pushed at it with all his might. Everyone who had latched onto the tree with wires slowly began to skid forward slightly as the overwhelming weight of the tree continued to lean forward anyways. Suddenly, a couple of them fell backwards as kunai struck them in the heads. Sarutobi looked up to see the Otogakure shinobi were now targeting all the shinobi trying to hold the tree up. A group of kunai were suddenly flying straight at his head. We'll protect you. Kakashi and Hayate appeared in front of the Hokage and deflected the kunai. They both immediately began to run forward with a group of other shinobi that were charging to defend those holding the tree up. Kakashi. Above. The copy ninja turned his head upwards at the Hokage's shout. To his horror, he saw the Nadaime hanging above everyone who was holding the tree up. He was running through the seal to form more vortexes of water. No you don't. Kakashi jumped skywards and formed a blade of lightning in his hand. Reikiri. The Nadaime wasn't able to dodge in the air and Kakashi's attack sliced through his hands and into his stomach. Impressive, Sharingan Warrior. The Nadaime kicked off of Kakashi and landed on the ground, his hands in the hole repairing themselves already. I wonder if you can win by yourself though. There was 5 of you before and you still had trouble. I'll figure something out, Kakashi said calmly as he swung his arm to the side and another blade of lightning formed in his hand. Just as he charged forward he caught sight of his students. What are they doing here? Tenten gave a loud shout as she swung her own chain that slowly began to wrap its way around the trunk of the tree. It took a full 30 seconds due to the size of the trunk before her chain tightened. I got it, she shouted triumphantly and heaved at the tree that was getting more and more crooked. Not even a second later and she was lifted off her feet as the tree picked her up. I don't got it. I don't got it. Damn. Sasuke sighed exaggeratedly as he jumped forward and grabbed onto her ankles. To his displeasure he was also lifted off the ground. Sasuke-kun. Sasuke. Kiba grabbed onto one leg at the calf and Sakura the other. Unsurprisingly, they were both lifted into the air too. Oh come on. Sasuke yelled in annoyance. I got you guys. An enlarged Choji easily wrapped one hand each against Kiba and Sakura. Finally, with the sound of a loud creak, enough shinobi had gathered that the tree stopped falling. The group of genin could see the golden dust, growing roots, giant staff, and just about everything else present that was contributing towards holding up the giant tree of Konoha. Let go of me. Let go. Tenten screamed in agony as Sasuke held onto her ankles with a death grip. Let go. Sakura and Kiba asked simultaneously. If you assholes let go, I'll kill you. Sasuke responded loudly. Which is it? Choji asked in confusion. Let go. Don't let go. Uchiha. Sasuke sighed. He knew that voice. A group of Zakus were flying straight at the chain of genin that held onto the tree, and unfortunately there was nothing they could do to fight them. Before the Zakus got even a few feet closer, however, they all split apart as Kakashi landed nimbly in front of them. What the hell do you guys think you are doing? He yelled at them. Helping. They all asked at once. I can't fight a former Hokage and protect you guys from all the Zaku at the same time. He said in annoyance as the Nadaime landed in front of him and he was forced to engage him in taijutsu. As he did, more Zaku began to fly at the genin. Before they got too much closer, they all lost control and crashed onto the ground. A moment later, and a group of bugs began to crawl out of the Zaku. Leave defending them to me, Kakashi-san. Shino would be upset if I let any harm befall his teammates. Aburame General said as he took up a defensive position, his bugs rising out from his body. Thanks, I owe you one. Kakashi nodded as he ran back towards the former Hokage. Now the task falls to you to defeat me. Tobirama walked forward slowly. That tree is still in danger of falling, and if you don't hurry, I may be the one to bring it down. Kakashi grinned behind his mask. Don't worry. I won't let that happen. Prove it, Sharingan warrior. Tobirama raised his hands to form more seals, but Kakashi was there in an instant. I will. He shouted as he separated the man's hands. He then stepped in lightly and drilled his elbow into the Nadaime's gut. Tobirama stumbled back slightly before settling into a taijutsu stance. Kakashi cartwheeled to him and brought both feet down in a powerful kick that the former Hokage blocked with his forearms. He pushed Kakashi back lightly and stepped in, swinging his foot upwards. Kakashi, still standing on his hands, pushed off the ground and into the air, well above the kick. He tucked into a ball and spun incredibly fast before breaking form and swinging down another kick. The Nadaime grabbed this kick, spun around and flung him with all his might. Kakashi sailed through the air but with a simple flip landed on his feet. When he raised his eyes up, he was surprised to see a vortex of water already coming right at him. Tobirama frowned deeply as Kakashi was seemingly caught in his attack. His body automatically turned to the right, where just 20 yards away the shinobi of Konoha were still struggling to hold the tree up. Don't even think about it. Tobirama looked straight down only for Kakashi's foot to connect with his chin. He was sent scaling into the air. Kakashi flipped into the air and appeared right above him, his elbow drilling into the Nadaime's solar plexus, slamming him into the ground, creating a small crater. Kakashi landed just outside of the crater, panting even more heavily than before. It was clear that he hadn't dodged the last attack entirely, as his Chunin vest had vanished completely and his black bodysuit was littered with big gaping holes. You are at your limit. Tobirama lifted himself out of the crater, unharmed. You are no longer using ninjutsu because you need one that can bind me, yet you don't seem to have one. So you're saving your chakra, waiting for a move that will beat me. Kakashi wiped the sweat from his face as he nodded ever so slightly. I just need to stall you until they get that tree up. Someone will come that can bind you for good. Not good enough. Kakashi's eyes widened as he realized the Nadaime was suddenly behind him. The dead man drilled his elbow into Kakashi's back and slammed him into the ground full force. You have blown your opportunity to save this village. I'm sorry. The Nadaime turned and began walking towards those holding the tree up. Kakashi placed his elbows on the ground and attempted to heft himself up but collapsed back down. Damn it, this body has had it. Kakashi settled for rolling over onto his back so he could at least watch the Nadaime's retreating form. As he did, he watched two shinobi jump in front of the man, attempting to stop him from making it to those who were holding the tree up. One water jutsu later and they both fell to the ground dead. The Nadaime raised his hands and began forming more seals. One swirling disk of water opened up next to him. Then another. Soon they began to pop up all around him as he prepared to launch them at all of the shinobi. No. Kakashi again tried to get back up but collapsed to the ground. There's got be something I can do, something. He grit his teeth as he stared at the Nadaime with all his might. Suddenly, something happened. Kakashi wasn't sure what, but he felt his Sharingan eye change. His vision became more clear for just a second. Then it happened, right in the middle of the Nadaime's back, a rift opened and the area around began to swirl as it got sucked in. The Nadaime turned around in surprise. He then smiled as the rift got bigger and began to pull his now twisting body in. Well done, Sharingan warrior. Those were the last words he said before he got sucked in completely. The water discs he had been forming collapsed completely when the user disappeared. What did I just do? Kakashi suddenly shut his Sharingan eye as it began burning painfully. He let out a yell of pain. Kakashi-sensei. Tenten and Sasuke yelled. They could hardly do anything as they were both still connected to the tree. I'm all right. Kakashi moaned as he slowly began to heft his body up. Another group of Zaku was flying towards him. Crap. I can't dodge. Suddenly, the Zaku began to veer out of control and they crashed into one another. I've got your back, Kakashi, Kurenai said as she crouched down next to him. Kakashi nodded his thanks as she hefted him up. He was just glad he had done it. He had actually beaten a Hokage in battle. Chapter 30, Invasion, Part 5. Face it, we're lost. Temari sighed as she stumbled through the low brush of the forest. We're not lost. Dosu, Haku, and Zabuza all said together. They all stopped and looked at each other at the same time. Finally, Dosu threw his hands up in the air. Okay, we're lost, he admitted before pointing dramatically at Zabuza. But only because he suggested we take a shortcut. We would have been fine if you guys would have just followed me quietly. Zabuza huffed as he pointed his thumb at Haku. This brat is the one who made us turn back around. If we would have followed my path a little longer we would have been there. But no, the shortcut wasn't short enough for him. Haku opened his mouth to protest but Temari suddenly made a shushing sound. They all immediately grew quiet and crept over to the brush she was using as cover. We're here, she whispered. Just on the other side of the brush was a huge clearing that had a dozen or so Otogakure shinobi pacing around lazily. On the other side of the clearing was the entrance to a cave. Any other ways in? Haku asked hopefully as he turned to Dosu. The boy's brown hair bounced lightly as he shook his head. This is the only entrance but that's okay. These men are the only ones that were left behind at the base. Once inside there are all kinds of traps though, but I'll be able to get us around those. The same way you got us here? Temari asked sarcastically. If we don't take any more shortcuts it will work out just fine. He glared at Zabuza as he talked. Fine, if you don't want to listen to me, just go in without me. Zabuza said as he formed a set of seals. A moment later and a thick mist settled over the clearing in front of them. They immediately heard shouts of panic from within the mist. What? Dosu and Temari asked simultaneously. Just let it go. Haku waved it off. He wants the chance to fight someone for once. As he said that he slipped past the brush they were hiding behind and into the mist. Slowly and hesitantly, Dosu and Temari followed him. They were surprised by how expertly he guided them through the mist and even more surprised that he got them to the entrance of the cave without running them into a single guard. Is Zabuza-sensei going to be okay fighting all of them by himself? Dosu asked as he took the lead and led them into the cave. Suddenly a scream from one of the men caused them all to turn around. It's a demon. Save me. The next noise the man made was the sound of him gurgling on his own blood. Oh yeah, he'll be fine. Haku smiled as the sound of the men dying brought back memories of him and Zabuza when they were missing Nin. Right, let's get moving. We need to make a detour. Dosu led them deeper into the cave. Not another shortcut I hope. Temari didn't like the sound of a detour. No, I just need to go to my room to retrieve something. Outside in the mist Zabuza had just sliced the jugular of the first man and stood over his bleeding body. The sound of a group of footsteps approaching made him smile even bigger behind his wrapped face as he slipped invisibly into the mist. 3 men ran to corpse of the man that had been their ally. Shit, what happened to him? The first one to arrive asked as he bent down and checked the man's throat where it looked like he had been sliced by something jagged. The sound of something thumping next to him startled him so badly he almost whirled a kunai. He saw a large round object laying just to his left in the mist. "You dropped this," he said as he reached towards it. He was surprised by how wet it felt when he grabbed onto it. With a terrible feeling he slowly grabbed the object and lifted it up. It was the head of one of the men standing behind him. "Oh my God!" he shouted as he dropped the head. The owner of it finally fell to the ground with another loud thud. Why didn't you notice?" He turned to see the other man behind him had vanished entirely. He hadn't even heard his footsteps leave the area. Just what is going on? He got to his feet and quickly began running through the mist. The thing he saw next caused him to rip his mask off a hurl on the spot. 5 more of his men lay completely dismembered on the spot. Their heads, legs, arms, and torsos lay inside a messy pile that was dripping with blood. Taicho. 2 more of his men ran up to him and out of the thick mist. "It's terrible. Everyone else is dead. Everyone." The man who had just hurled rose to his feet as he stared at his remaining 2 subordinates. "Or Jonin, for crying out loud. How many of them are there that we are being wiped out like this?" "I don't know, sir, but I'm glad I found you. We have to stick together." The other man nodded in agreement to the first man. It was this that caused the leader of the group to narrow his eyes. "Wait a second, how did you know where I was? We can't see in this mist at all and yet you ran right up to me." Well, I heard you barfing, sir." The man took a step back nervously. Before he could move another step, the leader of the group stepped forward and stabbed into his heart with a kunai. The man poofed into smoke and Zabuza was revealed. "Figured you out." The man twisted the kunai before pulling it out. Zabuza slipped down to his knees and gazed up at the man who had stabbed him. He then began chuckling as his body began to melt apart. "What?" Zabuza fell apart into water just as the sound of flesh being splattered reached his ears. He turned to see the real Zabuza standing behind his subordinate that had just been split in half, starting from his head and going down. "Why you, demon?" The leader fell to his knees as he stared at Zabuza's bloody blade. "Yes," Zabuza almost purred as he ripped the bandages around his face off and gave a truly horrific smile. "Remind me of what it means to be feared as the demon of the bloody mist." He stepped forward and rammed his sword right through the middle of the man's chest. Zabuza hefted the man's corpse up with his sword before he flung it deep into the mist with a simple flick. "How boring, I guess I'll go lend the others my aid after all." Zabuza took a couple steps forward, but the sound of another set of steps caused him to stop. From right in front of him, another person slowly materialized. Zabuza wordlessly stepped into the mist before he could be seen. A boy with long white hair tied behind his back slowly stepped around the misty area. He couldn't see any enemy, but he smelled a lot of blood. The sound of a sword swinging from behind reached his ears. Kimimaro made no move to get out of the way. Instead, 4 bones shot from his body and completely stopped a giant sword from lopping his head off. Zabuza wordlessly became visible now, his eyes widened in shock at the unexpected defense of his opponent. A former shinobi of Kurigakure. "This mist seems nostalgic to me, somehow." As Kimimaro spoke, another bone slowly rose out from his shoulder. He grabbed a hold of the bone and pulled it out, revealing it to be a short blade. When he spun around to strike, Zabuza was already gone. "That was unexpected." His voice rang out from inside the fog. "A unique Kekkei Genkai perhaps. What clan did you belong to?" "Keigaya," Kimimaro said in monotone, as he slowly searched the fog. "Oh, really? I thought my old village had wiped you all out. Maybe it's fate that we met here in this field." Zabuza's sword appeared again in a straight thrust. Kimimaro's ribcage shot forward and again caught the sword. This time though, when Zabuza pulled his sword back, he found it was trapped. Teshi Senden. Kimimaro held his hand out forward and the tips of his fingers fired off into the mist. The sound of splashing water filled the air and Kimimaro realized he had attacked a water clone. Silence again settled inside the thick mist. "I'm curious," Kimimaro called out. "Why are you here fighting me? What is your purpose?" "Purpose? What do you mean? In truth, I hate fighting. However, I must avenge Orochimaru-sama. As his tool, I lived only for his sake. Now that purpose is gone." Kimimaro stared straight out into the mist. Zabuza said nothing from his spot in the mist. Instead he started laughing. You remind me of someone close to me. At least, you're exactly like he used to be. Haku appeared vividly inside Zabuza's mind. I used to fight only for myself. I lived only for myself. Now, I fight because I have something even I want to protect. I won't let you destroy Konoha. I see, this will be a good fight then. Kimimaro slowly began walking. With each step his pace picked up a little and soon he was in an all-out sprint. Where do you think you're going? Zabuza shouted as he appeared right beside him, sword swinging. You can't cut me. Kimimaro shouted, his bones extending from his arm and ribs, deflecting the sword. As this happened he stopped hard and swung his own small bone blade forward. Zabuza turned his sword sideways and deflected Kimimaro's strike. Pushing back, he swung his sword. Multiple loud clangs rang through the clearing as they begin a close proximity sword battle. You're fairly skilled for being so young. Zabuza complimented. Kimimaro said nothing as he deflected yet another strike and made a series of quick jabs. Zabuza took a couple of steps backward, leaning slightly to avoid each strike. Unfortunately for you, I am a master swordsman, entrusted with one of the 7 most powerful blades ever created. Zabuza quit his backtrack and swung his sword low, digging it through the earth. As it made an upward arc, it threatened to chop Kimimaro in half. You should know by now that you can't cut me. Kimimaro blocked the strike with his bone sword. I can make my blades stronger than steel. You're more naive than I thought if you think I'm trying to cut you. As Zabuza shouted, Kimimaro was lifted off the ground by the force of his swing. He now was suspended 5 feet in the air. What? Kimimaro asked in shock. You may be able to block my strikes but I wonder how well your body will handle being crushed. Zabuza stopped his upward swing and completely reversed the swing of his blade. When it came back around it slammed Kimimaro from above and threw him forcefully into the ground, creating a deep crater in the process. Bones had sprouted out all over the boy's body just in time to absorb some of the shock, however the blow had been too great and Kimimaro spit blood as his body made contact with the ground. You react quickly but your bones won't be enough to save you now. Zabuza shouted as he swung his sword downwards again. Kimimaro had no chance to move and his body dug a little deeper into the ground. Zabuza repeated the process again. Damn, you. Kimimaro said between clenched teeth, blood flowing freely from his mouth. A small mark on his chest began to glow orange and lines quickly spread over his whole body. The lines quickly grew bigger and soon his whole body was glowing orange. I don't know what you're doing but it won't work. The ex-mist ninja shouted as he swung again. To his surprise, he felt his legs swept out from underneath, knocking him flat on his back. The hell? He looked up only to be surprised to see that Kimimaro had a tail now. The bone user stood up, his skin now a dark gray color, and 6 large bones protruding from his back. From here on out, I'll be fighting seriously. I hope you're prepared. You thinking changing your form makes you any stronger? Zabuza swung his sword with all his might. I know it does. Kimimaro crossed his arms in front of himself. Zabuza's sword was stopped completely. The bone user pushed back, knocking Zabuza off balance. Damn. Zabuza stumbled slightly off his feet. By the time he regained his balance, Kimimaro was on him. Take this. Kimimaro rammed into him, using the bones on his spikes as spears. Zabuza was barely able to block the bones with his sword in time. He was sent flying backwards where he landed painfully on his back. The ex-Kiri ninja found himself stumbling to his feet once again. When he turned his attention back to his opponent, he was surprised to see him pulling out what appeared to be his spinal cord. What a freaky kid. Zabuza hefted his sword up with just one hand. Tessenka no Mai, Suru. Kimimaro pulled his spinal cord completely out. At first it appeared to be a long sword, but when he swung it, the bone quickly took the form of a whip. Zabuza blocked the first strike with ease. He then charged forward and swung his massive blade. Kimimaro tilted his body slightly and Zabuza's sword struck one of his backbones. You should have given up trying to cut me down by now. I keep telling you it won't work. Kimimaro swung his whip again and Zabuza jumped high in the air to avoid it. We'll see about that. As long as my blade is intact, I'll find a way to split you wide open. As Zabuza began to fall, he pointed his blade straight down. Then I'll just have to shatter your blade. Kimimaro whispered as he rolled out of the way of Zabuza's descent. The swordsman slammed into the ground, his sword sinking up to the handle. Where's that confidence in your defense now? Zabuza pulled his sword from the ground with little effort. You shouldn't have needed to dodge that strike with your body. Tesenka no mai, Hana. Kimimaro ignored the swordsman as bones in his arm began to form a giant spear. This bone is the strongest my body can possibly produce. There will be no breaking this for you. Kimimaro dropped his whip and charged at the ex-mist ninja. We'll see about that. Zabuza matched his charge. As the two neared each other they both pulled their weapons back and then lashed forward. The weapons connected, and Zabuza's sword was completely shattered. Wah! Zabuza didn't get to say any more as Kimimaro's spear continued right on into his shoulder. I had told you all along it was pointless. Kimimaro leaned forward and attempted to spear Zabuza with his back spikes again. Like hell it was. Zabuza dropped his broken sword and grabbed a hold of the spear. He then pushed himself off and stumbled back a couple feet. Winning now is impossible for you. Without your sword you have no chance. Kimimaro straightened himself out and brought his spear up. Not that you had a chance to begin with. Since you're shinobi whose only skill is the sword, my victory was guaranteed. Zabuza chuckled lightly. Something funny. Kimimaro stared oddly at his opponent. Yeah, you think you have this fight all sewn up simply because my blade is broken. I think that's hilarious. Kimimaro frowned slightly at Zabuza's words. Listen kid, I never said my only strength was swordsmanship. That's just your misunderstanding. Then why persist with it to such an extent? I told you it wouldn't work. Kimimaro took a small step forward. I simply enjoy the feeling of getting to lop the head off of my opponent. Staying in such a peaceful village can be relaxing, but it does make it hard to keep up with my old hobby. Zabuza said while laughing. Kimimaro charged forward again. I've wounded you. This fight is over. To his surprise, Zabuza disappeared into the mist they had been fighting in. You think this small scratch is enough to offset this battle? I'm sorry to tell you kid, but I'm a Jonin. The only reason you were able to see me this whole time was because I allowed you see me. Zabuza's voice rang from several places at once. Now I'm going to end this battle. How do you intend to do that? Kimimaro stared around the mist once again. Tora, Ushi, Suru. Zabuza began chanting hand seals quietly into the mist. You, Hitsuji, I, Ushi, Uma. Kimimaro quickly began running through the mist, trying to pinpoint the sound. He had to stop him from completing the jutsu. Suru, Tora, Inu, Tora, Mi, Tora, Ushi, Suru, you. Zabuza's form became visible in the mist, his hands moving quickly as he formed seals. I got you. Kimimaro brought his spear up and charged at him. Tori. Zabuza completed the last seal. Sweeten. Daibikufu no Jutsu. A ring of water formed in front of Zabuza. The water then shot forward in a great wave and completely engulfed Kimimaro. At first Kimimaro was lifted off of his feet, but by extending his bones to the ground, he was able to anchor himself. With great horror, the bone user realized Zabuza was attempting to drown him. This can't happen. I won't die in such a pathetic way. I have to keep living for Orochimaru-sama. With these thoughts constantly repeating in his mind, the bone user took a small step forward. Zabuza's eyes widened in surprise. He could feel his opponent moving slowly but surely through his jutsu. What stubborn will! A bead of sweat rolled down the swordsman's forehead. Using such a powerful water jutsu took a lot of chakra even with a water source. Doing so without one was incredibly taxing on him. Worse yet, if his opponent somehow managed to break free, Zabuza wouldn't have much hope of winning. To further his fear, he saw the tip of the boy's spear break through his end of the vortex. Next, he saw the boy's face slowly start to break through. Impossible. Zabuza stood completely still in front of his opponent. He didn't dare move for fear of disrupting his jutsu. Why you? I won't let you. Kimimaro spoke between coughs of water. Only a small part of his body was out of the water. Slowly, he pulled his spear a little more forward. Inching it forward, the tip poked Zabuza's skin, right where his heart was. Die, for Orochimaru-sama, I'll kill you. Blood slowly began to trickle from the small hole Kimimaro was creating in Zabuza's flesh. Zabuza couldn't help it. He looked at this boy and again he saw Haku. Shaking his head free of the thought, Zabuza closed his eyes. I'm sorry, I'll free you from this miserable existence of living solely for the sake of another. It's too bad you can't be saved like Haku. Maybe if you had met that team, things would have been different. Having finished speaking, Zabuza poured even more chakra into his jutsu. Kimimaro was ripped backwards, his anchors no longer strong enough to support him. Zabuza pumped even more chakra to it, he could feel Kimimaro struggling against it pointlessly for just a few more minutes. Soon, his movement stopped and his body was slammed up against a tree. Slowly, Zabuza began to let up on the jutsu. He watched sadly as Kimimaro's lifeless body fell from his place on the tree and hit the ground. He cautiously approached the body. When he was right next to it, he leaned down and felt for a pulse. It was gone. "I'm sorry," the ex-Kiri ninja said quietly to himself before hefting his blade up. He held it under his still openly bleeding wound and watched it begin to repair itself. Just then he heard the sound of pounding footsteps. There was an incredible surge of chakra this way. Zabuza smiled evilly as he disappeared back into the mist. Reinforcements were coming, which meant he was still going to have a good time. Dosu admired the new sound manipulator he had just put on with a sense of security. Noticing this, Tamari snorted. "I can't believe you made us go all that way just to replace your broken toy." Dosu looked up at her indignantly, but Haku responded before he could. "It is not so much different from you and your fan, Tamari-san. You wouldn't want to enter enemy territory without it, right?" Tamari glared at Haku before making a grunt that probably meant she conceded the point. The ice user smiled. "I thought you'd understand." Dosu nodded his thanks at Haku, who merely smiled back at him. They were slowly but surely creeping through the dank tunnels that were lit only by small lanterns that hung off the walls. Dosu led the way through the traps, with Tamari directly behind him, and Haku behind her. "One more turn and we should be there," Dosu whispered as he edged his way around the corner after making sure the coast was clear. "You sure this is going to be the right place?" Tamari held onto her fan tightly, ready to swing it at the first notice of an enemy. "Positive," Dosu responded instantly. "There was a special area in the base that I wasn't allowed in. He has to be there. Why not let you help?" Haku rubbed his chin as he thought about it. "He probably didn't want me to know anything about it. I was supposed to die in the tournament after all. As someone expendable, the less I knew the better." Dosu peeked his head around the last corner and his eyes widened in surprise. "Everyone get back," he shouted as he shoved both of them backwards before diving that way himself. Wah! Tamari and Haku fell to ground on their butts just as a wave of sand flew over them in what would have been a fatal sweep. Dosu, who had landed on his stomach, rolled over and stood back up in front of his teammates. "Kabuto, you bastard, you would place a guard that would be almost impossible to get through." As Dosu said this, the sound of approaching footsteps reached their ears. Each step got louder and louder until finally, a small boy with red hair turned the corner and stood in their path. Gaara, Tamari felt her heart wrench in both pain and in fear as she stared at her younger brother. Her dead younger brother. "I'm afraid I can't let any of you go a step further." Gaara slowly walked forward and sand burst from his still-present gourd that completely sealed off the path behind him. "Whoever revived me won't allow it." Haku got up and stared at the small redhead. "Gaara-san, don't make this difficult. I am a friend of Naruto-san's, and as an extension I would like to be a friend of yours. Please let us through." "A friend of Naruto's, huh?" Gaara smiled sadly. "I'm afraid even if that is the case, the user has printed specific instructions to attack and kill anyone that tries to get through. As long as you don't try anything, I won't attack. So leave and go back to Naruto." Haku shook his head. "I can't do that. Naruto-san is in danger and we need to get past here to save him." Gaara's eyes widened ever so slightly. A moment later and his small smile grew bitter. "Then I hope you know a way to get past me. If you are truly a friend of Naruto's, then you should be able to do it. For Naruto-san, we'll definitely do it." Haku raised one hand up and began to form seals. Before he got even to the second one, Gaara's sand shot forward and snatched him. "What speed!" Haku shouted in surprise. Tamari gave a shout of exertion as she swung her still folded fan down, shattering the sand and freeing Haku. Dosu charged straight at Gaara as this was happening. "Take this." He swung his arm with the sound manipulator forward. "You'll have to do better than that." The sand completely covered Gaara in a dome that protected him from even the sound waves. "Quick, Haku, we need a plan." Tamari unfolded her fan and turned to her younger teammate. If I can just complete my mirrors I can get onto the other side. Haku shook himself free of any sand that was still on him. Before he completely blocked it off I created a mirror on the other end. I just need to make one more to get through. He brought his one hand up but the sand at his feet shot up and bound his fingers. Can you take anyone with you? Temari asked as she kicked at the sand freeing Haku's fingers, allowing him to form his last mirror. Dosu meanwhile, had fallen into a pattern of attacking and rolling away from the sand that struck back. Yeah, I can pull you both through. Haku stepped all the way back into his mirror and held his hand out for her. Temari shook her head. We need someone to stay behind or he'll give chase. His code sounded really simple, so as long as one of us stays back he won't move. So then, I'll stay. Temari cut him off. Dosu is the one that knows that most about this place and you need to be the one to use your mirrors, obviously. So leave it to me. Haku nodded slowly. Thank you, I know this must be hard for you. He turned his gaze towards his other teammate. Dosu. Yeah, I heard. Dosu rolled out of the way of another wave of sand and then immediately charged back towards them. The sand was quickly after him. No you don't. Temari waved. Her fan in the sand was buffeted backwards by the strong gust of wind. Dosu jumped forward and stuck his hand out. Haku grabbed a hold of it and pulled him in with one tug. A moment later and they both vanished and the ice mirror shattered. Well then, it looks like it's just you and me, Gaara. Temari said as she readied her fan for the next attack. I'm surprised you would volunteer to stay behind and fight me. Gaara's protective dome lowered and his body was slowly revealed. He smiled at the sight he saw. Temari was putting on a brave face but her entire body was trembling. You're still terrified of me. Temari shook her head in protest. That's not it. It's not because I'm scared. Liar. You and that oaf of a brother have always been afraid of me. Gaara's sand sprang into action and flew straight at Temari. That was true in the past. Temari admitted as she swung her fan forward. Most of the sand was buffeted to the side but several strands kept coming for her, forcing her to roll to the side. That's changed now though Gaara. I'm truly sorry for the way we treated you. Empty words. Gaara spat as more sand sprang forward from his gourd and attacked the blonde. The only one that ever cared was Naruto. He tried his hardest to save me even at the expense of his own life. What have you ever done for me? Temari opened and shut her mouth but she wasn't able to say anything. She let herself get lost in her memories for just a moment but it was enough for Gaara's sand to smash into her, knocking her over and sending her fan free from her grip. She smashed into the wall of the cave with a loud crack and slowly slid to the ground. The sand that had assaulted her retreated back into the gourd and on Gaara's back. That's what I thought. You never cared. Gaara slowly turned towards the wall of sand he had erected behind him. Wait. Temari gasped as she leaned forward so she was on her hands and knees. The back of her head bled freely and dripped its way around to her cheeks and rolled off her chin. I'm not done yet. You still intend to try to break through. Gaara turned back and his sand slowly began to rise from his gourd. Temari shook her head. I won't try to get past, I promise. I just want to talk. She shakily got to her feet and began to stumble towards her younger brother. What are you doing? Gaara's sand continued to come out from his gourd. It reached around him and formed a giant defensive claw. I told you, I just want to talk. I want you to know something Gaara. Blood trickled down and covered Temari's right eye as she continued to limp her way towards her brother. Stay away. Gaara yelled as she got just within a couple feet. I'll crush you. No, you won't. Temari lunged the rest of the way forward and Gaara's sand instantly shot down, ready to crush her. Just mere centimeters away from doing so and the sand grinded to a halt. Temari hadn't attacked him, but rather, hugged him. Her arms wrapped around his back, squeezing him tightly. Gaara's chin just rested on her shoulder. I don't understand. The feelings inside Gaara suddenly became all jumbled and he lost control of his sand so it collapsed to the ground around them. Gaara, I'm so sorry for the way I treated you. Temari felt tears leak from her eyes as she talked to him. They dripped down her face and mixed in with her blood. I was truly afraid of you. I thought you would kill me at any moment. What are you saying? Gaara asked meekly as he tried pushing himself away from the hug. He clearly lacked the resolve to do so, however, as he only gave a small slight nudges before giving up. He couldn't explain it, but he felt so warm. I'm saying the things I never thought I would get to say to you when you died. You know what I did when I found out you died, Gaara. Temari pulled her face back and loosened her grip slightly so she could look at his face. Gaara shook his head. Stop it. I cried. I cried so hard that I was forced to realize something deep inside of me that I had repressed all this time. Gaara continued to shake his head. Tears slowly began to leak from his eyes now too. Gaara, I loved you. You were my little brother and I loved you. Please, just let go of me. Gaara tried to pull away harder but Temari pulled him in tightly again. No, she said feverishly. I won't let you go this time. Do you remember when we were little kids? Before we really understood what the village thought of you. Gaara couldn't move a muscle now as his tears spilled over her shoulder. We used to play ball together, you, me, and Kankuro. Do you remember what you used to call me? She whispered these words ever so gently. Gaara nodded. Then, say it. Oh, that was the only bit Gaara was able to choke out before his mouth snapped shut. Say it, Oni-chan. Gaara choked out between sobs as he wrapped his arms around her too. He buried his face in her shoulder. That's right. I'm your Oni-chan. Temari and Gaara both sunk to their knees as they held each other. I've always been your Oni-chan. Gaara slowly leaned his head back and looked at her. Temari smiled lightly back him, an effect ruined by her face covered in blood and tears. She brought her hand up and slowly touched Gaara's cheek. To her surprise, the spot she touched began to crumble. Gaara, you had your sand armor on. He shook his head slowly. No, I'm disappearing, he said quietly. What? Temari then noticed Gaara's grip behind her get weaker as his hands and arms began to dissolve into dust. No, Gaara, you can't do this now. I just got you back. I just finally got my little brother back. Oni-chan, I'm dead. Gaara told her in a hushed voice. Yet even though I'm dead, you've reminded me what it was like to truly be alive again. To be loved by someone. Thank you, tell that to Naruto too. I thank him too. His skin began deteriorating faster and Temari felt her grip began to sink into Gaara's back as that too crumbled apart. No, Gaara, you can't go. I won't let you go. Temari shouted as she began picking up the dirt that had once been his body. She tried placing back on his fast as she could but it wasn't working. Oni-chan, I'm so sorry. Gaara whispered before he crumbled apart completely, leaving Temari with only dirt that slowly trickled through her fingers. Gaara, she choked out as she watched the pile in her hands grow smaller and smaller. She slowly brought it up to her face as she cried into it. Gaara, this is it. Dosu and Haku stood directly in front of two steel doors that sat at the end of the cave. Without any hesitation, they each placed their hands around a big ring attached to the door and pulled. They both swung up easily and the contents of the room were exposed. To both of their surprise, a giant underground pond lay in front of them. Lining the wall on the other side were thousands of monitors that all showed different parts of Konoha. In the middle of the pond was a small island with a giant tube filled with some kind of green liquid. Those screens must each be the view of each of the Zakus, Haku whispered in awe. There were probably 2,000 of them and just barely half of them had been blacked out. More so than the monitor. What about that tube? What do you think is in there? Dosu asked as he took a step onto the water. Without warning he was suddenly blasted backwards as the water violently shot skywards and ejected him from the surface. What the hell? Dosu asked as he was sent spinning through the air. Dosu-san, Haku yelled in surprise. He took a couple steps backwards and managed to catch him before he crashed into the ground. Surprised, they both turned to see a body begin to materialize out of the water. My body is this pond and this pond is my body. You won't be getting across so easily. You're Suigetsu, the younger brother of Mangetsu. Haku said in awe as he set Dosu down on his feet. Oh, you've heard of me? Suigetsu asked in surprise. Of course, I am a student of Momochi Zabuza. Haku stated proudly. Oh, then you would surely recognize this. Suigetsu slowly pulled a giant needle out of the water. Nuibari. Haku breathed out. Of course he knew of that sword. Of all of the 7 swords, that was the one he wanted the most. Even more so than Zabuza's own blade. We're getting off track here. Dosu stamped his foot down and pointed at Suigetsu. Tell us how to stop Zaku. The sound of familiar laughter echoed across the cave before Suigetsu could answer. You can't stop me. That's impossible. Zaku. Dosu shouted as he began scanning around the cave for his former teammate. Where are you? Right here. Dosu's eyes locked in on the green tube. What he saw caused both of his eyes to go wide. Floating in the middle of the liquid was the dismembered head of Zaku. Zaku, what happened to you? Dosu couldn't believe his old teammate was nothing more than just a head in a tube. He clenched his fists in anger. What the hell did you let Kabuto do to you? Zaku continued to laugh maniacally as it swam around the tube in zigzags. I let him make me powerful. Zaku. Dosu took a couple steps closer, but immediately a stream of water broke out of the pond and attacked him. No you don't. Haku formed a group of one-handed seals and the water froze in its tracks. Dosu, you get over to Zaku. I'll deal with this guy. If he is made of water, that means I have the advantage. Don't make that sound so easy. As long as he touches water, I can halt his movement. Suigetsu bragged as he tapped his foot lightly on the water. That's presuming I touch it at all. The seal on Dosu's neck quickly spread to his whole body, and then a moment later it began to envelope his whole skin. His spiky, brown hair turned long and white and his skin gray. His toes and fingers became hooked, and wings spread under his arm span. Finally, his ears turned triangular and jutted sideways. Oh. Zaku was laughing again. And you yell at me for what I let Kabuto did to me body. What about your own? This is different. I can still walk around. I'm not stuck in a tube. Dosu flapped his wings and immediately took off towards the ceiling of the cave. Even if you fly, you can't get past me. Suigetsu shouted as the water began to rise towards Dosu. You have me to deal with. Haku shouted as he appeared in front of Suigetsu. He swung his katana and lopped his opponent's head clean off, only for it to turn into water and then splash into the pond. Suigetsu laughed as his head reformed itself. That won't work. As long as I am on this pond, I can't die. The water around Haku's feet began wrapping around his legs. Meanwhile, Dosu was still flying madly around as he tried to avoid being smashed by the water trailing after him. Then I'll just have to get you off the pond. Haku created an ice mirror right behind Suigetsu while freezing the water that was attempting to bind his legs. He then jumped forward and tackled Suigetsu into the mirror. A moment later and they both fell out of one on the outside of the pond. Damn! Suigetsu shouted as he rolled on the rocky ground. The water that had been trailing Dosu collapsed back into the pond as Suigetsu lost control of it. He got up and immediately began to sprint for it, but before he got even more than a couple steps he was completely surrounded by mirrors of ice. You're not going anywhere. An image of Haku appeared inside each mirror. You shouldn't underestimate me or the power of Nuibari. Suigetsu shouted as he held the giant needle forward. A long wire was attached to a loop at the bottom of the blade. You shouldn't underestimate my Kekkei Genkei. Haku shot back as he pulled out several Senbon needles. A moment later and a dozen of them littered the ground and Suigetsu's body was covered in tiny holes. Hey, that didn't hurt at all. He gave a shark-like smile. And you fell for my trap. It was then that Haku noticed the wire on the end of Nuibari was leading right to him. Haku looked down in surprise to see the wire led right to his arm. When did you? The moment you stepped out of your mirror. You're not the only fast one around here. Suigetsu gave a massive tug and Haku was pulled out of his mirror and straight towards his opponent. Now take this. Suigetsu's knee drilled into Haku's stomach, knocking the wind from his body. Yet another moment later and Haku felt his whole arm go numb as Suigetsu used Nuibari to sew his arm to the side of his stomach. Now for your other arm. Suigetsu still had a razor-sharp smile as he raised Nuibari up high. You seem to have forgotten I only need one hand to make seals. Haku shouted as he immediately formed 3 seals. His hand began to glow bright blue for just a second as he slammed it into Suigetsu's face. The sharkish boy only laughed. What do you think that would do against me? I'm made of water. Precisely. Haku smirked as he watched Suigetsu's body began to freeze. What? What did you do to me? Suigetsu asked in horror. He could do nothing as his body turned into solid ice. This is my win. That means Nuibari is mine. Those were the last words Suigetsu ever heard before he froze completely and then crumbled apart. Haku bent down and picked up the sword. This is going to take time to unsew myself. You're on your own, Dosu. Dosu's super sensitive hearing just barely managed to pick up Haku's words. That's a hell of a lot of pressure to put on a guy who has only been a Konoha shinobi for a few hours. He shouted loudly. He was closing in on the tube that held Zaku. A Konoha shinobi? Zaku asked while laughing. You really have fallen low, Dosu. I don't want to hear that from you. Dosu dive-bombed at the tube. Before he was able to react, a giant air cannon rose from the top and fired, blasting into Dosu with such force that he was sent spiraling out of control. He crash-landed on the miniature island in the middle of the pond and his curse seal then receded completely. Damn it. I'm still worn out from my fight with Lee. Need help. Zaku laughed as two mechanical pincers at the end of large metallic cords came out and grabbed onto either of Dosu's arms. They hefted him into the air and brought him right in front of the tube. Zaku's head then floated up to meet him. You see what being a part of Konoha got you. You should have just quit and fled from the village. Now you're going to die a meaningless death. My life isn't meaningless. Dosu whispered fiercely under his breath. Konoha taught me that as long as you try, nothing is meaningless. Zaku sneered at his former teammate as he talked. And you know what else they taught me? For once, Zaku was completely quiet. They taught me to never give up. Dosu pulled his head back and then headbutted the glass tube with all his might, creating a massive crack. No. Zaku threw him to the ground and immediately began trying to push at the giant crack with his mechanical pincers. A small amount of water was leaking out of it. Sorry, Zaku. You lose. Dosu sat up and flicked his sound manipulator with his finger. The sound wave hit the cracked glass and shattered it completely. Dosu. Zaku screamed as his dismembered head fell out of the tube and landed on the hard, rock surface. The head began to make strange gasping noises for a few moments and Dosu could only watch in pity as the green liquid that had sustained his former teammate's life drained into the lake. Finally, after a few long antagonizing seconds, Zaku died. Blood dripped down Dosu's forehead and into one of his eyes but he didn't care. Instead he let himself fall backwards so he could stare at the ceiling of the cave. We did it. Haku stepped up onto the small island. Yeah, we did it. The Zaku that had buzzing around nastily suddenly all began to collapse and crash into the ground all at once. Taking note of this, the shinobi of Konoha and Suna began cheering as they renewed their efforts to save the tree and fight off the remaining Otogakure shinobi. Everyone, just a little more. Hiruzen shouted as he began pulling with newfound strength. The tree was slowly but surely beginning to fall back into place with everyone's combined efforts. Choza pushed from the other side along with the Cage's golden dust jutsu. Meanwhile, Yamato finished repairing all the roots. Finally, the tree stood completely upright. All of the glowing green orbs that had been flickering out made a collective sheen noise as they returned back to their full strength. A chorus of cheers rang out from all of the Konoha and Sunagakure shinobi. They all dropped their wires and immediately charged up to aid those who were still in combat. The remaining Otogakure shinobi became hopelessly outnumbered. The Kazekage collapsed to his knees, gasping heavily. Hiruzen ran up next to him. Kazekage Dono. Are you well? Of course I am. The Kazekage inhaled deeply and shakily got to his feet. What are you standing around me for? This battle isn't over yet. Hiruzen smiled. The battle may not be over, but thanks to your efforts. Victory is within sight. End of the chapter.